get started, will join us. Greg Strange will not be present tonight. He's had a conflict, unfortunately, with family issue. So he sends his best. I send him back our best. I hope everything will as well. Here to call the meeting for 7 o'clock, Community Preservation Committee. Thankfully, it's nice to see all of you in person. We don't have to read the rules about remote meetings, so appreciate you all making the time to come today. With that, we'll take a roll call, and we can just go around. So name and present.
Al Benson, present.
John Ventresco, present.
Meredith Keach, present.
Dennis Sheedy, present.
Tom Broussard, present.
Jim Lee, present.
Ed Hands, present.
Excellent. So we have a quorum, and hopefully Amanda Varela will join us. So we can get started. Tonight, team, we only have a few items listed on the agenda, but they are definitely meaty. So I hope you ate a nice dinner, had a great day, slept good last night, and we'll have an awesome meeting today. Normal business, we do have minutes from our last meeting. This is the regular session minutes, meeting dated November 17th, 2022. I would recommend, just so that you don't think I'm skipping over it, but the executive session minutes previously still contain information for a subject that we are most likely pursuing at some point. That's still going. So I would not recommend that we release any executive session minutes, but I would take a motion, if everybody's had a chance to review the minutes, for the November 17th regular session to accept. So move, that's Jim and Ventresco. Take it around the table.
Aye.
Ventresco, aye.
Keach, aye.
Sheedy, aye.
Broussard, aye.
Lee, aye.
Hands, aye.
Excellent, that is unanimous. Awesome, so the next two items on the session tonight, one is the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall Technical Review Committee update. I think we can forego that, as we have the Technical Review Committee here, and the information you're gonna hear is gonna be fantastic. So we have a single application tonight. This is the first review of the draft application for the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall. It is our discussion. I do not anticipate a vote will happen tonight. It would be more of a discussion. We have the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall team here. Fred's front and center. Suzanne, I believe it's the rest of the board members that also have joined. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to join us tonight. So we'll give the floor to that team. The way I envision it is we'll most likely have roughly 60 to 70 minutes of presentation. After that, we'll have our own internal discussion. We can certainly ask any questions as we go through. It's a normal application process. There's a lot to it. So Greg, if he was here, and I would acknowledge we've sat through hours of meetings that this team has really dedicated to putting forth a solid application. So for us, we'll be able to rehash it, but for you, it will be an awful lot of incredibly awesome information. There's a lot of great visuals. There's a lot of presentation slides that you'll hear. I think they've done a great job to get us to this point, to help you all understand, and me of course as well, what this application is about, the details. And then afterwards, we'll have a period of time for public questions. If anybody from the public wants to join, this is an important project, I think, for the community. And then we'll also have our debate to talk about how we want to proceed as a committee next, potential issues, discussion points that we want to have, questions we need explored, so on and so forth. So I would definitely envision that we'll have a second meeting to discuss the application that would be just as meaty after you've had a chance to digest the information they want to share with us today. Any questions before we begin? Thoughts? That was just an outstanding introduction, Jim. You crushed it. Perfect. So I'll hand it over to the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall team and ask you to walk us through what we're going to see tonight.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Tom. Is this good on the mic? Okay, thanks. First off, we want to thank the CPC and Chairman Tom Broussard for letting Lynn Spencer, Suzanne Bump, and myself present this evening. Preservation architect for the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall, Lynn Spencer, will speak next, and then Suzanne Bump, who is a board member and Hall secretary. I will be talking briefly about the history and significance of the Hall, Lynn on the details of our project proposal, and Suzanne on our current situation and plans for the future. Now, I know some of this will be very familiar to some of you, but I know there are others out there who probably have not heard this, so bear with me. Good evening. I'm Fred Ames, president of the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall Association, a nonprofit Massachusetts corporation. The association is the owner and manager of the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall. Board members serve without pay, and all excess revenue from operations is reinvested in the maintenance of the building. Unlike our neighbor, the Ames Free Library, the hall was not given with an endowment. Okay, the big question, what is the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall? In November 1881, the association was incorporated. Its stated purpose was, quote, acquiring by gift, bequest, or otherwise property both real and personal to be used for a memorial hall and held in trust for the benefit of the inhabitants of Easton, for the ordinary purposes of a town hall, and for other purposes consistent therewith. The association purchased the hall for $1 from Governor Oliver Ames and his brother Oaks Ainger. Now, the following month, agreement between the town and the association stated in part, quote, the said corporation shall have the care and control of said hall and shall be devoted to keeping the building and premises in good repair. In the 1890s, the hall was voted by architects as one of the 10 best buildings in America. Today, Americans and tourists know of H.H. Richardson's significance in American architecture, and some of them travel great distances to visit the hall. While giving a tour to a small group of college professors from the University of Cork in Ireland, one professor says he gazed up at the hall, I have waited over 20 years to see this building. The hall is a National Historic Landmark. The building's famous architect, H.H. Richardson, and its renowned landscape architect, F.L. Olmsted, were the recognized leaders in their professions and are honored to this day. The hall is perhaps the finest example of the creative design partnership between Richardson and Olmsted. And I know Lynn has a slide showing that later. Anyway, Olmsted selected the rugged site and designed the monumental staircase that leads from the street up to the hall. And I think Olmsted has done that so well, we really don't even notice it. It just seems such an integral part of the building. Congressman Oaks, who the building was named after, was a central figure in the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. His friend, President Abraham Lincoln, had asked him to take charge of the building of the Union Pacific Railroad, telling him, quote, you will be the remembered man of your generation. Along with his brother Oliver, they provided financial backing for the Union Pacific Railroad, financial backing that came from the Shovel Company profits. The importance of the Transcontinental Railroad and its transformative effect on the 19th century American economy and way of life, like the effect of the creation of the internet, cannot be overstated. In the early years of the hall, financial support was almost entirely from private donations, primarily from the Ames family. By the First World War, the town was helping, but private donations were still the largest source of funding. Starting in the 1980s, the town's contribution was catching up, and by the early 2000s, by way of the generosity of the CPC, the town was clearly the major source of financial support. The Hall Board directors raised funds from state grants and charitable organizations, and we will redouble our efforts for the proposed project. The hall is an iconic symbol of Easton, of 19th century America, of Richardson and Olmsted and the American Renaissance, of the Ames family and their philanthropy, and of the prosperous Shovel Works with its links to the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and Easton's important role in American history, and of the efforts of the people that led to that accomplishment. With good stewardship, the hall will remain visible, vital, and relevant to the community as an autonomous organization for another 141 years. And with that, I would like to introduce Lynn Spencer, but first a word about Suzanne Bump, who will speak third. And I spent about over a year trying to recruit Suzanne to the board, and she has proven to be worth the wait, and you'll hear from her third. But again, I've known Lynn for over 11 years, and she is truly dedicated to this building and has done tremendous work, and I don't need to say more. So, Lynn.
Well, thank you, Fred. Wow, that was very kind, and what a great introduction. So, technical crew, does this work if I hold the mic? Yep, okay. So it is my pleasure to be with you tonight. Maybe I can even put it down here and it'll work. Yes, Fred is correct. I have known the Fred Ames and the association for 11 years. I first started work in 2012, and here it is a decade later. So tonight, I'm going to take you on the journey that we have been on for the last 6 months, because CPC and the town meeting, in their generosity in May of this year, made 2 important grants to the association and the hall. The first was an emergency grant to deal with a collapsed truss issue within the hall, within Hall A. We'll be looking at that a little bit. But tonight, we're really looking in depth at the investment that you made in developing plans and specifications to address major repairs, major improvements that will help ensure the next century or so for the hall and its site. So with that, Wayne, could we get started with the slideshow? Now, some of this you will have heard a little bit about, so I will just say we will advance this so we get to the heart of the matter. But it is absolutely true, as Fred said, that this building is an iconic structure. It is a treasure in this town. It is a building, along with other buildings in town, that people come from all over the country and the world to see. And certainly when Richardson, next slide, when Richardson conceived of this site in collaboration with Olmsted, he was making a very strong statement. This is a robust, very muscular building. It commands its site, and it is what you see as you sort of come down Main Street towards the, if you will, the civic and historic center of Easton. These are some images from the past. The image on the far right at the top is an image that Richardson's office took. That would have been a glass plate negative for you historians, and it certainly does say something about the growth of this building from the granite bedrock and the celebration of, if you will, a structure that is reaching skyward. We'll go on. We already heard the Ames family and the early work in the 19th century with developing the shovel manufacturing in Easton was an important part of the village center, in fact, the employment of many in town. It afforded the ability to, these were shovels that were used to dig the Erie Canal. These were shovels that were used, throughout the country for their innovative design. And as you see in the upper right photograph, that sort of, manufacturing heritage led eventually to the involvement with joining the Intercontinental Railroad. Next. Here are the 2 figures that have their fingers all over this particular building and other buildings in town. Henry Hobson Richardson, a bright star, at the end of his life, was age 48. In that time period, he did an amazing architectural legacy, not only in Easton and in Boston, but all over the country. Olmsted is thought by many to be the originator of the idea of the public park as opposed to the private preserve. And so his idea of Central Park was a place that people would gather for refreshment, for relaxation, to recharge themselves. And his work is also seen here in Easton. Next. And there you have the composite. Oaks Ames Hall, the marvelous public library, the 2 images of the well, I see one is mislabeled, I'm sorry. The railroad station is labeled the library, but it's actually the railroad station. And then, of course, we've got the rockery, which is extraordinary. And I want you to keep that image in mind. Those sort of natural boulders formed into what seems to be a natural outcrop, but in fact is a monument to the Civil War. And in fact, my colleague here tonight, Doug Manley, was in fact involved in the conservation of that structure a few years ago.
Yes, that's right.
So here, you've heard from Fred. This was was conceived of by the donors and the architect as a building that would serve as the town hall. Now, I don't think that that's in the function that we think of town halls today. You know, Connor is here along with Stephanie and others. Your town hall is in fact full of offices where people are working in various departmental and professional capacities. I think the town hall idea here was as a gathering place where people could come together for social, educational events. And we see this quote from Hugh, not Jackman, because actually we all know who Hugh Jackman is, right? Anyone? That was this author's little mistake. It's actually a quote from Hugh Howard, who wrote a book that I recommend to all of you. Architects of an American Landscape, Henry Hobson Richardson, Frederick Law Olmsted, and the Reimagining of America's Public and Private Spaces. Hugh Jackman is known for Wolverine or Les Miserables, you choose. So I apologize for that boo-boo, but here's the author, and that's the quote. That idea of a building in search of identity has been part of what has been the legacy and the challenge. Next slide. We see that it was given to the town for the benefit of the community, and for about 50, 60, and nearly 100 years, it was used for various social events. Now, I want to remind you that at the time this building was built, people visited this building either on foot or in horse and buggies. The building code wasn't in existence at the time, nor was zoning or the kind of planning considerations that we have today. Next. So, you heard that the Ames family and private donors were the major supporters for many years. But a century mark on a building like this has its consequences. And I first became involved because Fred and the association had succeeded in getting a Massachusetts Preservation Projects Fund to begin some much needed exterior masonry restoration. It became clear, I think, to the Community Preservation Committee that, coming back year after year with various small grant applications was probably pushing something down the road that really needed to be dealt with. In 2015, Town Hall with Community Preservation and the association conceived of the idea of a comprehensive master plan. Let's stop chasing the leaks. Let's actually deal with the whole story. And so there was a competition. I had had some experience with the building, but other firms were asked to submit proposals. I felt very pleased that our firm was selected, and we then prepared a comprehensive master plan, inside and outside. I, along with structural engineer, mechanical engineers, various experts, went through that building top to bottom to identify deficiencies that were as a result of deferred maintenance, perhaps, or deferred work, but also to look at critical life safety issues. I mentioned a moment ago, at the time this building was built, there were no fire codes. There was no building code. Practical design came into consideration, and certainly Richardson, with his contractor Norcross, built a solid building. But a lot of the things that we now concern ourselves with really needed to be addressed. Some of them had been. There is a sprinkler system, for instance, in the building, but there was more to do. That study identified nearly $6 million worth of work that was really then divided into four phases, and then phased over time. Now, we all know what happens when projects get deferred. The costs don't necessarily go down. The costs tend to escalate. So with the next slide, we then sort of think about, we had this information 6 years ago, $6 million worth of needs, comprehensive needs, how to tackle that. The association then applied to the Mass Cultural Facilities Fund and obtained a grant to develop a business plan, a strategic plan. And that plan reinforced a lot of the recommendations that were in that comprehensive master plan. A need for building code upgrades, including handicapped access. How many of you have struggled up to the second floor of to an event at Hall A? Or have seen, an elderly person sort of leaning on their cane and holding onto the railing? I sprained my ankle 2 weeks ago, and I can tell you what it means. It's hard to do. Air conditioning. The hall is virtually out of use 3 months of the year because it gets so warm. So again, if we're going to think about a place that can be fully used and vitalized, air conditioning and, quite honestly, reliable heating is a necessity. Make it beautiful. It needed to be fresh. It needs to be appealing. Why? Well, in fact, function rentals and community events are the lifeblood of this hall. That is what is sustaining it financially. And so it needs to be something that people really feel engaged and want to be with. And then last but not least, I mentioned a little while ago, Shanks Mare and a horse and carriage were the way people used to get to the hall, but now people drive there. So, we have a driveway, we have some parking behind, but as part of the master plan that I worked on, as well as the consultants involved in the strategic plan, dealing with parking was viewed as a critical requirement, something that really could not be ignored. You see with some of these images a preview of what you're going to now hear in detail. Next. So here I want to reinforce one of the great assets of this building. We've talked about its commanding location, but in fact it's its proximity to the public library and to Quessett House and to the beautiful grounds of that complex that is a real value. You may actually say, what's on the screen? Well, of course, these are the images of the buildings that I'm speaking about. One of the objectives that was identified in these two studies was how to link this complex in a meaningful way. Think of it as a campus, so that the library could easily have programs that can be accommodated in Oaks Ames Hall, either in the upper hall or the lower hall, and really sort of expand and augment and deepen its offerings. So, how could we accomplish that? Well, I've said building care is the first priority. So I'm going to, in the next slides, look at what it means to address critical needs at the hall. This is a recent image where we're doing some roof repair at that upper dormer. That dormer is part of the reason why we had critical structural issues earlier this year. Unfortunately, Fred observed a crack in Hall A in late March and called me immediately. And the next thing I knew, in the next slide, we were bringing in structural engineers, and we identified what was really judged to be a near collapse of one of those great trusses that hold that sort of enormous roof up in the air. You're seeing some images of, in fact, how CPC money has been put to work to complete the structural repairs on those trusses. All four ends of the trusses were reinforced with these very large steel plates, and then the openings that were created in that were covered up. See the three gentlemen down below? Well, the one in the middle was the one who did most of this work, a really remarkable craftsman named Bob Couteau. But Yankee Steeple, Tom Everett, as well as Bob's son, were involved in all the logistics to make this happen. This is a demonstration of the kind of need for continuing monitoring of a building like this, because keeping the water out is one of the key issues. That dormer, if you go back, can you go back? That dormer that is actually being repaired here was the source of just enough leaking on either side of that to get water into that plate. And that happened on both sides of the building. That roof is the second tile roof. The association had to deal with major repairs of that tile roof about 40 years ago. This is a roof that should last another 40 years as long as it's maintained. In fact, if you look carefully, you'll see there's a missing tile here and there, and it's the kind of thing that it's constant vigilance is part of. So with the recommendations of the comprehensive preservation project that you helped fund earlier this year, we're recommending, various aspects of roof restoration as well as masonry restoration. We've done a lot of repointing on this building of the brickwork and granite work, but it's the brownstone that is now the big challenge. If we can go to the next slide. I think it was something like 1990, Fred, when you actually got a planning grant from the Mass Historical Commission to begin to look at the issues related to brownstone. You can see that there's a lot of sort of exfoliation and pockets because of water penetration and, quite honestly, the inherent defects of brownstone. It's a sedimentary stone. When it gets wet and there's a freeze, it actually can freeze and pop off stone. And some of this is related to the drainage patterns from the roof, blowing in rain and so on. You'll see that if you look closely at this building, that some of the balusters, for instance, have been replaced with basically cast stone, which is a really fancy term for concrete tinted to look like stone. We're recommending, as part of this really digging deep and doing the right thing by this building, that we do what is called a combination of things. Some brownstone replacement, and you'll see some of the samples that we are now looking at for matching stone. Unfortunately, this stone is no longer easily available except by salvage. One of the values of the collaboration of Norcross, Richardson's builder with Richardson, is they owned the Longmeadow quarries, and that was a major source of brownstone. So we're recommending selective treatment here, some brownstone replacement, some work in cast stone, and some patching. And this is both on the outside of that loggia, that major architectural feature, as well as the inside. Next. Now, what's interesting, because you all are appreciators of this building, is a lot of the detail, the beautiful carving on this building on the outside is in better shape than on the inside. And that's because basically the conservators that we've worked with on this have concluded that the loggia holds a microclimate, and there's differential weathering and drying out of the stone, which is part of the story for its deterioration. So that's a stone story. Let's go on to the other parts of what is really critical, again, to achieve a sustainable structure. Handicapped access. Now, a few years ago, a ramp was installed that makes the first floor of this building accessible, and that makes enormous amounts of sense. But we think that there's an important need to provide access to the upper hall that is used for weddings, for concerts, and all kinds of events. And Doug, I would love it if you would like to sort of speak to this.
Okay, yeah.
Because Doug is, I'm the preservation person in my office, but Doug is the architect as well. We both share in sort of passion for historic preservation, but when it comes to design and making the code work, that's Doug Manley.
So
You'll have to come over here.
So as Lynn mentioned, one of the features that makes this building, would make it more attractive for rental use and events, is being able to get to the second floor. So early schemes that we looked at, we were looking at an elevator tower that was appended to the building. And the more we thought that through, the more we disliked what that meant to the Richardson legacy and the importance of the building. So we've looked at getting, it's a full-sized 3,500-pound capacity elevator that will fit within the building's footprint. It will take people from the first floor to the second floor, and still all take place within the footprint and the envelope of the building. So there's no elevator penthouse popping through the building at any place. So it's from the exterior, the building will not be changed at all
Right.
going forward.
So there's the elevator.
So in doing that, we took the space that's currently the kitchen, moving it to the structural bay right next to it, and redoing the kitchen. As another feature of the building that we think is important to position it as an attractive rental space is a good serviceable kitchen to support events in the space. So we've reworked the kitchen as part of this as well. And added a service ramp to the rear of the building to service the kitchen. It gives direct access to the elevator and to the kitchen, providing mainly service to that space, and a new elevator lobby with that too. So that's the intent, and it's. The elevator won't require a excavation of drilling a piston core. It's a elevator, underslung electric elevator, very efficient, energy-wise, and in the amount of space and construction, the constructability of it. It's quite usable.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's go to the second floor. And then on the second floor, it comes up into what is now a servery. And that gives a small pantry space as well, but that makes both the first floor and the second floor easily accessible, and that's important. It does not go to the third floor. The architectural intervention that would be necessary to do that, we felt, was going a bridge too far, quite honestly. So the third floor, which houses the former Masonic space, would be accessible via video or interpretive panels down below, or for those who are able-bodied to view it upon occasion. It's not open on a general basis. Just a little bit about the kitchen. This is a catering kitchen, so caterers are expected to bring in prepared foods, warm them up, and serve them out. Other parts of what makes this building work for everybody is air conditioning and reliable heating. The heating system is really, I know, Fred, that you've been sort of making it live a little bit longer, but it's really on its last legs. It's a forced hot air system. We actually, with our engineers, and all of this involves a lot of people, so we worked with CSI engineers, full service mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection engineers to come up with a heating and air conditioning plan. With this, there will also be upgrades to the electrical wiring. Some of you may well understand there's knob and tube wiring still in this building. Artifacts to be sure, but not something to live with and not really safe long run. So we'll be completely rewiring this building. And we will also be upgrading the electrical service because an elevator is going to require more power, as well as the air conditioning.
And then overall, wish to cut back on fossil fuel by
Yes.
a full electric system.
Full electric, yeah. And with that, there'll be some more insulation. So, move on. Lighting. The hall has some lighting, but it's, again, dated, and to make it attractive and versatile, we're working with Lamb Lighting Consultants to come up with lighting for the entire building. You're looking here at the first floor. So we respect the historic, let's go to the next one. Oh, and that's the upper floor. So that's, the diagrammatic kind of way the architects and designers depict things on a plan. But here you can see some of the idea of fixtures. So for instance, Hall B, the lower floor hall, has a wonderful fixture that was recreated from pieces of older fixtures that were found in the building a few years ago. That's that pendant that you see right there. And so we're simply adding in Hall A some wall sconces that are consistent with that appearance. These are chandeliers that are being considered for the smaller Hall A room. This kind of process involves working with both appropriate siting of fixtures, but appropriate selection of fixtures. Go on. Upstairs, we're also looking at, fixtures, in this case, that recall the past, but have a little bit of a twist to them, something that is a little bit more of the moment. We also are responding to the idea of having ceiling fans that will actually stir air and, allow sort of shoulder season sort of cooling and air circulation. So, again, what's part of the story? To make it beautiful and to make it usable. Next. What does making it beautiful mean? So we have surfaces that have been maintained, but in fact they are tired. This is a view of the upper hall just as the work is being started on the truss repairs. So part of what we're talking about with this comprehensive project is actually refreshing the finishes, and in some cases with flooring, totally replacing floors that have come down, that are actually worn down to their last sort of sanding, or in the case of the first floor, have a replacement floor that has started to sort of deteriorate. Next. We are using paint analysis because we're good historic preservation people to actually uncover the original colors. There were no photographs of the interior of this building, so how do you actually figure out what Richardson had in mind? Well, you do it by scraping and sampling. This just shows you some of those exposures. They may be either the basis for restoration work or a starting point for rethinking some of the finishes, because what was perhaps acceptable and popular in, the 1880s may not be where we want to go in the future, but it will give us a solid thinking basis for that work. Next. Last but not least, here is a room that reflects Richardson's design aesthetic. So this is the one place, the Masonic room, where we have Richardson's ceiling intact. The walls, in fact, had been covered with a canvas covering with designs on it as well. You're seeing the remnants of the JC occupation of that space with their characteristic red and yellow. But the ceiling is really a magnificent piece of work, and that will have some readhesion of paint and will be conserved. Next. Now we'll get to a complicated but challenging part of this, and that is the issue of both parking as well as restoring or conserving that monumental staircase. I mentioned earlier that the relationship of the hall to the library and Quessett House is an important asset. And when we were doing our earlier planning 5 years ago, we had conversations with the librarian, Uma, at the time about how great it would be to find ways to link these two properties. So what you're seeing on this plan is the hall itself. Do you want to locate that? There's the hall. There's the monumental staircase in front of it. But behind, in what is now a wooded area, which is actually part of town-owned property that through a special act of the legislature is being leased to the hall, we are creating a 60-car parking lot. The linkage to the library is being accomplished by accessible walkway. You're seeing the mouse sort of take its little route down there, as well as a direct walkway with stairs. So it's both handicapped accessible, but if you're in a hurry and you want to get right down to the library, it's possible to do that as well. We're taking that slope area and planting it with broadleaves, various broadleaves that won't require a lot of maintenance, but in fact will be beautiful. They're derived in part from the 1906 Olmsted plant list that we found that had been conceived of for the hall, but as far as we know, not really planted. The other part of what you're seeing on this plan is a storage shed right there. Because one of the things that happened when we located that elevator is that we took away storage space, and we were advised by the association to make this work, we need to be able to have some storage. So we're creating a small storage shed as well as a dumpster enclosure, so it's a little bit more organized in terms of the space at the back. Let's go into some of the detail on this. And Doug, you've got a diagram right next to you, and I don't know if I get the mic over to you.
In order to create this, if you've been back there, there's considerable cut and fill of the landscape. You see, this is a dotted line here of the contour today. So a deep cut is done here and balanced with fill, and another cut here in order to create this. But we show this just to give an idea of what this cross-section will be like. One of the other features that Lynn told you to remember, the stacked walls of the cairn, the rockery. We're doing something similar to that, which is an overlook as a stopping spot for the accessible walk as you go from the upper level down to the lower level.
So there's a real concern about will the neighbors on the other side be, oops, sorry, thank you, Fred. Will the neighbors on the other side, you know, find that they're looking at a parking lot all the time? What we found is that when we did this contour analysis, the grades itself help sort of mitigate that effect. Whereas from the library side of it, you know, there was certainly concern about what's it like for the library to look up at a series of cars. And that's why both a combination of stone walls as well as plantings will help mitigate that view. Let's go on. Back to that rockery, can you just sort of show that, Wayne, on the plan? That's that idea of taking a cue from from Olmsted's rockery and just giving a stopping point and viewpoint on the way. Next. The monumental staircase. That's a beautiful structure. I think when Olmsted conceived of it, he conceived of a series of landings. So there's stopping points along the way, stopping points that have become important for concerts and gatherings outside. At the same time, the way things are perched with the granite, on that granite outcropping, there is the potential for what we might call a trip and fall. So what we're suggesting here to mitigate that, rather than putting a series of guardrails, we're using plantings. And you see the planting strips? We're creating planting strips, just narrow sort of beds of views that will keep people back from the edge, be consistent with the landscape concept. And that happens at both the big asphalt area down below as well as the upper area. This can still be used for concerts. I know that that's something that people really, truly enjoy. We also show in this detailed plan the handicapped parking spaces that are immediately behind the building. You're seeing the new sort of service entrance as well as places for the condensers. So all of this is being sort of, if you will, sort of organized in that back, what is now that back parking lot. Go on. I'm going to push along quite quickly here. We're just, in this case, saying one of the things we're doing is thinking about lighting and site lighting. So again, if we sort of move forward with the monumental staircase and the entrance to the property, We're looking at using some pole lighting that recalls historic fixtures. Those are some images of what had been the older fixtures that were here on this site. The lower fixtures are now commercially available. They are derived from Olmsted's design for Central Park. We are doing a little bit of site lighting. Let's just keep moving. And then we sort of go to a different type of lighting for the parking lot. Those of you who are library patrons know that when the library did their recent parking lot renovations, they used quite a bit contemporary light fixture. Not something that was trying to be historic. It recognizes I'm in a parking lot. We're taking the same kind of cue for this parking lot. But as with the library, we're using a dark sky fixture, so the light is directed downward. Next. That walkway will be accessible in the evening, and so to do that, we have lit bollards. Here are two examples, as well as lighting that's incorporated in the stone walls. Next. Railings. We do have some railings. Those will be actually illuminated as well. Next. And there's some spotlighting on the building, and that's part of what we now see as being a real value, because this is something that is such a prominent part of the Main Street and driving experience. So, a little bit of night lighting and some lighting for the arches. Hold back. Let me take it. I think I need a drink of water. So you're going to say, what is all this going to cost, Lynn? This is all very, ambitious. What are we talking about here? I am going to take a sip of water.
While Lynn's taking a well-deserved sip, just some context, because there was a tremendous amount of thought that went into each of those slides before they became a slide. So a couple things. One, just to let you know that the library has been included in discussions. The last 2, maybe 3 TRC meetings, they were invited so that they could be exposed and they could do their own engagement. I think, as you can tell, there's a very important campus-style collection or connection and collaboration that's being proposed. And so that has an impact on them. One of the spots that comes to mind is the degrees of view regarding the parking lot. Not only were we concerned, is the team concerned about the view from the residents' side, but also how does the library view it? Is that going to disrupt the experience that library people have? So it has been a collaborative effort. I give credit to the hall, I give credit to the process for trying to do as best as possible to keep the different constituencies and stakeholders informed so that they can come back and look at it from their viewpoint. So just wanted to add a little bit of color that each of these slides has a lot of debate and a lot of iterations, and I would encourage you at the right point, wherever, Lynn, you feel is good, to ask questions. Questions were asked about the lights, the style, the finish, how long does it last, is there light pollution, who sees what, is it going to be a wall that blocks the view, or is it going to be greenery that blocks the view, who maintains the greenery. So I just know I've had the benefit of listening to those hundreds, if not thousands of questions, and at some point, feel free, I know you're digesting and receiving, but there are no bad questions, so.
There's no bad questions, and in fact, I have, apart from the task force committees, I'm going to be at the library trustees, what is it, Bill? It's on the 14th at 6 o'clock, and that will be really an in-depth discussion with them about this, because they've had some preview, they're thinking about things, because this idea of linkage and collaboration is very important, so it has to work all sides, all sides. As Tom was saying, there's a lot that has gone into this. So at this point, this is our drawing set. We have worked with a structural engineer, Structures North, mechanical engineers, lighting designers, landscape architects, mural conservator, civil engineer, and geotechnical engineers. This set is in the process of being cost estimated by ZVI Construction. However, so I don't have final cost estimates, but what you're going to see on the next slide is there we go, next. Cue. The rough estimates of where we think this is going to come down based on the experience that we've had on this site as well as other sites. So yes, what has been talked about as $8 to $10 million is shading on to $10 million. It is broken down into the work on the building, the exterior envelope and brownstone, the elevator and kitchen, the HVAC and electrical, lighting, floors, painting, the Masonic ceiling. That's all a substantial investment in the building itself. The site work, which includes the work on the monumental staircase as well as the parking and the walkway to the library, is a high estimate. It's estimated at this point at $2 million. We had the benefit of geotechnical analysis helped by the town of Easton that provided a backhoe to make some test pits. And the good news is that while that area behind the hall has some rocky outcroppings, it's pretty friable, and we actually had test pits going down 5-6 feet before we hit Gabbro. So it looks like it's a pretty good prospect without a lot of, hole ramming of stonework and so on. But, when we sort of then add in the general conditions for construction management contingency and architect's fee, we are rising on $10 million. We'll get better sort of quantified cost estimates on that in the next month or so. There's been a lot of work in a relatively short period of time because we had basically from June on to do this. So, our work is not complete in terms of the construction documents. There is more work to be done, but I think this will give a reliable guide for cost estimating, and that has been the objective. So, what to do next? What to do next? Well, I think there's the great hope that community preservation will continue to be a partner on this in terms of funding. At the same time, the association has actually identified $500,000 of fundraising that they're working on and have in fact raised $150,000 to date towards that goal. So, there's work to be done to figure out how this is going to be funded and executed next. In terms of how we might think about this, in terms of impact on the site, impact on the building and the operations, and I know, the call experienced 2 years of COVID and then an unexpected cessation of function rentals earlier this year because we had to close it for the structural work. We are thinking that this can be divided into 2 phases, building-related work as well as the site work. But that is something that needs to be discussed with all parties in great detail. But what is also on this chart and in the handout is some of the fundraising that the hall is undertaking on its initiative, as well as the actual construction schedule. Next. So, in close, before Suzanne comes up, what is this vision? What is the basis of this vision, which was conceived over 100 years ago, and now we're talking about the next century. It's a national landmark, and it's the centerpiece of Easton's cultural district. Easton has clearly recognized the cultural patrimony that it has, and wants to be able to share it. So the work that we're talking about in terms of renovation is all about creating a space where people will want to come, that they'll be comfortable, feel safe, though it can be easily accommodated, and that can be used for educational, social, and cultural events, performance, and so on. And as we know, both performance space and function rentals have spin-off benefits for local businesses and enterprises. So with that, I have spoken too long, I'm sure, but Suzanne is up next. But before Suzanne comes on, are there any sort of specific questions that I can address?
I have a few, can I
Please.
Yeah, now, if it's okay, to have some, I think, question and answer, because you've honestly given us a lot, and I'm sure the team, has a lot for you. So you're not quite done yet.
I know that. I'm only warmed up.
The first question is, what is the elevator capacity?
It's a 3,500-pound elevator, is the weight capacity.
Okay.
So, in terms of a number of people, probably 6, 8 riders at a time.
And what will the third floor, is there a plan for the third floor at this time as far as your purview?
We want to conserve that ceiling for sure. And I think the thought, and more needs to be really developed on this, but the thought is perhaps that can be used for some limited interpretation. It's possible to go up by a staircase. It is not possible to be fully accessible. And so that's why I was saying on the lower floor, what would make sense is what's called alternative compliance. A film, for instance, or a handout, or some kind of photo display that actually helps depict that. When we studied what it meant to bring an elevator either on the outside of the building or within the building, it was a really intrusive intervention.
Well, Queeset House doesn't have an elevator to get to the second floor, correct?
I'm sorry?
Queeset does?
Yes, that's the world's slowest elevator.
Okay.
It must be a Lula.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah. It's a contemplative ride.
And that's used for artists and residents, correct? For the
It
most
goes
part?
all the way to the third floor.
Okay.
So you raise an interesting question because we have asked ourselves, well, if we could get to the second floor, can we get another device that would get us to the third floor that is not necessarily an elevator and certainly not a chairlift, but could be, a limited use, limited access device. So that's something that would be, a continuing discussion.
A couple more questions regarding the parking. The parking lot, I believe you mentioned, is a 60-car lot. What is the capacity for each ballroom? And if you were using, so I'm kind of trying to get an idea of the building is completely used, how many people are going to be there? Is there going to be a need for additional parking that we need to look for or plan, or if someone were going to use the space for, let's say there were 2 weddings going on at once, would we need to find additional parking via valet or whatnot?
I think that's a fair question. I mean, the hall A capacity is 200.
Okay.
So, when you do the sort of indices on parking, that's the 60-car parking lot certainly accommodates that. If Hall B is used at the same time, it could push another 30 to 50 people, and so there might be some more cars. I should mention, too, that the idea of the parking is not just for the use of the hall, but is also thought of as additional parking for the library, especially if the library is having a major event either down below or using the hall for its event purposes.
What is the parking
To
at the
take
library?
To take it a step further, fair question, but just to add color, that's actually would be a leased from the town, that parking lot land, so it would be accessible to the town broader as well. So it would service all of downtown and the needs of parking as well. It would be open parking.
It's pretty fair capacity at the library too, if I remember correctly.
Fair question. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but just to add color to that last one.
Yeah, I think that's
Parking at
great.
the library.
What's that, there's a question?
Bill, do you by chance know how many parking spots are at the library?
I would say there's 30, 35.
Give or take?
Yeah, about that,
So it would give you close to 100 spots between the two buildings.
between the two.
The entrance drive, what's the width of that? How many cars? Would be the plan for?
It's for cars it's widened so
2
that cars
cars.
can pass.
So one in and people can be coming out at
Yes,
the same time?
it's two-way traffic. It's-
Okay.
And it basically kind of more or less is such
It's
now.
Small two-way. We had a lot of pushback with the designers on it. We didn't want a very broad boulevard, but we did want that two-way traffic. So we kind of designed right at the right spot for two-way traffic.
Excellent. And And then one last, which I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this or not, but as we look towards expanding use, you had mentioned the lighting and who would be impacted. What about noise? So with the Queesit building, which is magnificent, my team just used it yesterday, there was a ramp up for functions. And I know one of the neighbors had some difficulty with the noise that then impacted his property. Is that something that we could plan for, design for? I'm looking at the stained glass windows, which are magnificent, but perhaps they don't insulate from noise to the outside world.
I think that's an interesting point. We can look at double glazing to help with that. There are acoustical panels already in Hall A that I think at least help when you're within the space. But I'm not aware about if there have been objections from neighbors about noise.
I would say none that I can remember.
Okay.
I think in the past there's
Yeah.
been one or two, but it's really been the exception, so. We take steps so that won't happen too. So,
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
John?
I had several questions, but in the interest of time, I will just ask a few and then defer back to members. First, I want to get back to the third floor. I mean, we get to this level, it's such a magnificent room.
I know.
What is the main objection to bringing the elevator further up? I'm trying to picture in my head,
Yeah.
once you get beyond the second floor, what is it impacting on that third floor?
So if you picture the geometry of the building with the steep roof, it would mean a structure that would go up alongside the roof and need a bridge to bridge
Okay.
this sloped space is the main reason.
I would love to see, we get to this level, as I stated, some type of usage when we're at this financial level.
I know.
It
I
just
hear
kills
you,
me 'cause
John.
it's
I hear you.
Such a magnificent space.
And it's a place where, some of the historical sort of history and character of the town can be
Absolutely.
portrayed, yeah.
Does ADA compliance prohibit us from renovating that space or have a plan for a space if we don't have accessibility with an elevator?
To every part of it?
Well, to the third floor and.
Right.
You can renovate it, but you wouldn't be able to open it to the public unless it were.
So
That's where Lynn mentioned alternative compliance.
So you can't use it,
The video
it's like a
showing
museum.
what's there.
Well, I think what we would do, this is the thin ice that Lynn goes out on and Doug says, I'm going to save you. We would actually come up with what's called alternative compliance for users who cannot make it up there, but we would go to the Architectural Access Board for a variance that could allow able-bodied people, kids, whatever, to scamper up that staircase. It's the staircase in the tower and then up to, there's a perfectly good staircase up to the space, but it's a lot of stairs.
I'm just thinking financially, it's just such a unique room,
Yeah.
space, that in the realm of a business plan, that people would love to use that.
Love to see it, yeah.
Love
And
to
in
see it, and again, have business meetings up there, so forth, so forth.
Yeah.
Which goes to my next question about, I know we had the master plan. I thought, and I can't recall exactly, but wasn't there a business plan
Yes.
implemented in that strategic? It
Yes.
was pretty substantial.
There was.
So where is that at this?
I think Suzanne is going to
Okay,
address
so
that in
I'll hold
part.
that question. So
Yeah.
you're basing it on, not getting back to a financial question or two, 10 million. I think we all know that's probably based on 2022. Everything that's come to this board with applications, in some cases, has doubled. Then this is a project that I'm assuming has to be bonded here. I mean, we haven't got to that point yet, but I'm assuming. So we're gonna be upwards of far more than that. So I am for a project. I've always said in my lifetime, I'd love to see this just done. But there are obviously some hurdles to get through to get to that point.
Yeah.
So we could be talking 12, 15, 18 million.
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying. So how are we going, let me explain how we're going about the cost estimating. We're working with a company called ZVI Construction, and they've already started working with us on that elevator and HVAC pricing. They actually brought in subcontractors. So this is not just sitting in an office. This is actually going out to the trades and pulling people in to get pricing. We certainly will be building in an escalation and inflation. And that's why that schedule that I showed you, which actually shows 2 years of construction, becomes important. But yes, I hear what you're saying. All I can say is stick with me, stick with Doug, stick with the task force, because in January we'll be back with, more detailed costs. But right now, those are rough estimates based on our experience and what we've spent a lot of time looking at this. So, but good point, John.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I'll wait on the next question until we hear the business plan part of the
Yeah.
program tonight.
I'm sort of a semi-disabled person when it comes to getting to the third floor. I have vertigo, which means I can go up those stairs because I face the stairs. It's coming down the stairs because of the lack of railings or things like that. Something simple like that might make it not accessible for programming, but accessible for interpretation.
There are railings there, but you really have to go to the outside wall to use them. You are right about that.
Yes, I've been there, thank you.
Yeah, I know.
I have another question, and that relates to the other significant piece of decorative art there, the mural. Are there any plans for the mural? That's, for those of you who don't know,
Yeah.
that comes from the Booth Theater in New York, the original Edwin Booth, brother of John Wilkes Booth Theater. And the Ameses brought it up in 1883 when they sold that theater and put it there. It's probably the largest piece of stagecraft left from the 19th century in the United States. We just discovered this a few years ago, and it's in need of a good cleaning and some repair work. Is that built into this?
Yes, we've actually, the pricing for that, as well as the ceiling, is with a company, a conservator called Gianfranco Poccobene, who has looked at that on several occasions. By the way, he's got a great name, but he's from Medford.
Al, Jim, Dennis, go for it.
Is it safe to assume the hall will be closed during this entire thing?
Well, the hall will, and that's one of the real challenges, and I know Joan is looking at me now. It'll have to be closed in part, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then on the kitchen, open flame or just a warming? Is it, you said catering, so is it just a warming?
Yeah, it's a sealed electric cooktop.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a commercial kitchen?
No, it's not commercial.
Thank you.
Convection ovens, things of that sort, like good counter space. It actually works quite well because you can enter through the service entrance, you get right into the kitchen, and then there's an existing door that comes out through that space, so you don't have to, we kind of separate a little bit from the public spaces. Right now, caterers come in the front door, go to the kitchen, it's very visible. So it's a little bit more refined.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I think, Suzanne, if you want to come up, I know that we will, as a team, deliberate after we've heard the presentation, and it might elicit more questions.
I just wanted to know if you wanted a chair.
There's one right next to Dennis. I swear he doesn't bite. I've sat next to him.
So, you want to be up here? Yeah.
Oh, no, wherever you want to be.
Yeah. Why
If you're
don't you go
presenting on the
back here?
materials, if you're there, if you want to be at the mic, that's great. Dennis, I told you you didn't bite, so now you really can't.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Bump. I reside at 6 House Shop Street. I'm a member, as Fred Ames has indicated, of the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall Association Board. I've been a member of the Technical Review Committee for this project for the past several months. I'd like to thank you, Chairman Broussard, and all members of the CPC, as well as my colleagues from the board, for allowing me to present this evening. I grew up in the town of Whitman. On one fateful day in my childhood, I passed through the village area of Northeaston. And from that time until I came to live in Easton 5 years ago, I carried a single and singular image of my visit in my memory, and it was of the Oaks Ames Hall. And I can trace the birth of my amateur's interest in historical architecture to that site. So I'm really honored and excited to be part of maintaining, and with this application, renewing both this building and its role in the community. So my mission tonight is to speak to how the board sees its role and its responsibilities for the hall today and in the future. And I will address 5 key areas: the hall's current competitive position, business plan development, striving for self-sufficiency, board readiness, and commitment to accountability. Our competitive position in the market. So as you understand, the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall was envisioned by the Ames family as a center of community activity, and it certainly has been that. Entertainment, political discourse, community celebration, charitable fundraisers, public meetings, seasonal gatherings, weddings, scout ceremonies, veteran services, and more have all been hosted by the hall. But with its limited access by mobility impaired persons, insufficient parking, and the lack of air conditioning, it cannot meet the needs of the town and the town's people, and it is simply not competitive as an event space. And because of this, and really also to the point, with those deficits, it also cannot be self-sufficient. I'm going to provide you a very recent example. Last Friday, the hall hosted a concert with Tom Rush, a folk music legend. He was visiting the hall for the 3rd time, and it was a great success. With effective social media advertising, the concert attracted a near sellout crowd of more than 180 people from nearby and actually not so nearby towns. Now, since Tom Rush is 81 years old, many in the audience were at or were approaching that age. And I watched as a ticket taker at the front desk as a number of them struggled to ascend first the hall's monumental staircase, then needed to take a breather in the lobby before they could proceed to the concert hall. And while Tom Rush appreciated the beauty and the history of the hall and really appreciated its acoustics, he also told me that at a minimum, it needs to offer performers elevators to move their equipment up and down, proper stage lighting, and private space for performers to dress, eat, and rest if we're actually going to attract serious musical and other performance talent. And that's coming from a performer whose onstage theatrics are minimal. Younger performers want higher production values and accommodations, and their audiences expect that. It's a fact that those performers and their audiences are beyond our reach right now. So in short, if it's the hope of the townspeople and the goal of the hall board to ensure that the vision of the hall as a center of community activity and as a self-sufficient enterprise is to be viable in the modern era, then investment is necessary. Which leads me to number 2, business plan development. The hall board realizes that we can't take an if we fix it, then they will come approach to a renovated hall. We can't wait for the world in 2026 to discover that Easton now has a state-of-the-art facility that's housed in a magnificent and truly unique and historically significant building, and that it's joined by a dramatically landscaped walkway to another historically significant building designed by the same renowned architect with adjacent picturesque gardens. As I said before, there's serious competition in this market. Therefore, the Hall Board is already discussing the business planning, especially the market assessment and strategizing that needs to be done before the Hall opens anew. We need to know where our greatest opportunities for both community accommodation and commercial success lie. And that means consulting with wedding and events planners, business organizations, cultural tourism experts, performing arts organizations, talent reps, and community groups. We need to explore and vet the viability of a mix of uses for the Hall and of potential commercial partnerships that we may wish to enter. We need an understanding of how the new landscaping area and parking will accommodate the activities at the Hall, as well as those of our next door neighbor, which also offers cultural activities and hosts social events. We need to envision our place in the Shoveltown Cultural District. And further, and importantly, we need to engage with groups who have essentially been shut out of the facility due to its lack of easy access for seniors and those with mobility impairments. Helping them see themselves in the Hall will be doing a huge community service. And once these opportunities and strategies have been developed, then a real strategic plan and then a business plan of operations will be developed for execution by the board and a compensated professional staff. If the Hall is going to diversify its partnerships, offerings, and income streams, we're going to need to supplement our current experienced talent, which we have in Joan Lundgren. Our goals are professional management and financial self-sufficiency. The Hall Board was asked by your chairman in this process to provide some projected financials, and those have been submitted. As you review them, however, I really urge you to keep a couple of things in mind. First, this is a good faith effort to show what might be possible, but it is a projection that wouldn't even come into effect for 3 years from now. 2, they don't reflect an actual plan of action because I just said that has to be developed. Therefore, the focus of these projections is on hall rentals, something that we already do, that we're quite familiar with. They don't consider the possible advertising revenue, ticket revenue, or income from commercial partnerships that may come about in the future. What they do is provide you with a sense of the level of activity at the Hall that will be required to achieve financial success. And they demonstrate the fact that there's going to be a gradual buildup of post-renovation activity as we demonstrate to the world our new capabilities. Number 3, striving for self-sufficiency. As the financial reports provided with the application demonstrate, the Hall has been an essentially break-even operation in recent years. Our bookings have, in fact, rebounded well from the pandemic and even from the shutdown of earlier this year, and our income covers basic operations. But our inability to offer bookings year-round is a major deficiency, and it's probably our most significant one because, as Lynn Spencer told you, the Hall is essentially out of commission during the peak wedding season, which is the summer, because we lack air conditioning. So part of the business planning that's going to be occurring is the identification of funding, both public and private, and both short-term and long-term, that may be available to the Hall as a charitable organization. Grants that support particular programs, especially cultural programming, awards from foundations, bequests, individual donations, event sponsorships, all have to be in the mix in order to meet not just the ongoing needs of the Hall, but the future needs of the Hall as well. As Lynn Spencer has indicated, we'll be seeking major grant funding to supplement CPC resources for this renovation. And these kinds of efforts, we recognize, cannot and will not cease when this project reaches its successful completion. The board recognizes its obligation to build reserves to properly care for this historic property in the future. As noted in our application, and as Lynn just mentioned as well, the hall has been recipient in years past, including this year, of CPC funding. And CPC's encouragement of this very project and the town meeting approval of the grant for project design that Lynn has just presented has given this board real hope that we may be able to make the hall a much more viable and vibrant space. And the board is especially grateful that you came to literally our rescue this year when that perilous deterioration of the trusses necessitated emergency repairs. And as Lynn emphasized for us, the board raised $150,000, including 2 major grants from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is indicative both of our recognition of our responsibilities and our ability to rise to the occasion. Number 4, board readiness. This year, the board welcomed 3 new members, bringing our total to 8. Fred Ames has created a volunteer team, if I may say so, in all modesty, that is rich in talent. Our areas of expertise span construction and historic preservation. I'm looking to Tim Hurley. Local business connections, Gail Devens. Law and local government, Jason Sutton is in another town board meeting and is unable to be here. Local nonprofit activities, communication, marketing, Pam Borberley and Howard Miller. Business planning and operations, Kristen Stone, who also is cannot be here because she's on a business trip. And governance, that's me. Sadly, we lost the vision, skills, and Rolodex of Carolyn Cole, but her spirit lives on in the summer music series that we continued this year. This is a board that's well equipped and is ready to meet the challenge of leading the hall into the future. Last, commitment to accountability. This board is also committed to giving the town the accountability that it deserves in return for this quite sizable investment in the hall. We need to demonstrate, not just today, but into the future, that the board is providing good stewardship of this community asset. During the past several months, there have been discussions between representatives of the town and of the hall board as to the elements of transparency and accountability that the board should adopt. The board agrees that for an investment of this magnitude, the town is indeed entitled to insight and input into the future operations of the hall, of course, without jeopardizing our IRS status as a private nonprofit organization. Elements that have already been agreed to in principle are an expansion of the board to include members nominated by the select board, inclusion of these public members in all committees of the board, term limits for officers of the board, regular reporting to both the select board and the CPC on the finances and operations of the hall, at least 1 annual public board meeting so that every member of the community can be aware of what's happening at the hall, and commitment by the board to a 3-year strategic planning cycle. These elements will be incorporated into both the board's bylaws and its contract for the hall renovations with the CPC. I see this hall as part of the connective tissue that links the town's past to the modern day. Community support has been the lifeblood of the hall for generations. I hope that that spirit continues to course through its veins in the year to come, and I thank you for your kind attention to my presentation.
Thank you so much. Well said. Team, just 2 points of quick clarification. And Suzanne, I think it was changed probably in iterations of the presentation, but this team has not received a business plan yet. And the one that I received, Fred, I believe was a draft, so I did not forward it to the team. So at the right time, when one is available, team, know, and I bring it up, John, just because I know it was a pointed question of yours. It has been, as Suzanne mentioned, an ask of mine as well, an understanding of who the organization has been previously from a financial perspective and what this investment will enable them to become in the future in terms of a financial picture that would create. So I know the team understands that and they're looking forward to it. We just haven't received it yet as a committee. Suzanne, so when it's ready, we'll be happy to digest.
If I may,
Please.
what I think that you were provided with pro forma, three-year projections based on increased hall activity, only as I indicated in the field, in the area of rentals for events, so weddings, meetings and the like.
So,
It-
yep, and I can speak to that. So
Yeah.
A, it's not in your application.
Okay,
B, it's not in your
Yeah.
presentation, and it was in your presentation, the draft I saw 3 days ago, or 2 days ago. And lastly, the only reformer I received did speak to the components you spoke to, but Fred was very clear in a joint meeting that that was a draft to begin the discussions. I'm happy to share that if that's what you'd like. I just want to make sure that's what you want me to share.
I'm sorry. I think it's right if you want to share it, that's fine with me.
Sure.
And we did have discussions on that you were looking for a 5-year. So far, we went out to 3 years. But, you know, I'm sorry if that wasn't present in some of the relevant reports. Certainly, that was my intention, the board's intention. that
No,
that be-
not at all. That's okay. I was just clarifying.
did you receive that?
I did. So
Oh, okay.
again, a couple things. One, you mentioned it was in the application, and I didn't want the team looking through your application
Oh, I'm
saying
sorry.
where
Oh,
is
I
it.
assumed
So,
it had been circulated.
Team, it's not in the application. I did receive a draft pro forma, and I'm happy to forward it. It's just that I thought it was draft, and the last thing I've learned in my profession is you don't share a draft of somebody else's commitment unless you know that's exactly their commitment. So I'm happy to share it, Fred, Suzanne, and I'll certainly copy you so you know the material I'm sharing exactly illustrates what you want to be shared because it's your application.
Yes, and keep in mind how it was qualified as, wouldn't say being anybody's guess, as an educated guess projection, but
Yep.
again,
Absolutely.
everybody's probably aware of that.
Got it. Perfect. So, yep, good. And a business plan I think is important. So, team, any questions before we kind of start our discussion? And I'll give an intro to that. First, Suzanne, and any of the points that she made?
Yeah, Suzanne, I do have a question, and it goes to actually Joan too. You know, I've been in, for those who don't know who I am, I've been a professional photographer all my life. I've been in the function business for over 40 years. It's not the way it was 20 years ago. So to rely on just, say, weddings, bar mitzvahs, you're gonna need a lot more. And, you know, I had thought about this quite heavily because this project is phenomenal. I mean, the presentations tonight have been great, but I'm also putting on another hat as a taxpayer, and the questions that are gonna be asked to us at town meeting, where I don't think we've ever had a project like this, other than Shovel Shop, but we don't own it, and we don't own this building either. So the investment to it, I have to, and I already have been drumming this up, trying to get, you know, questions that I have in my mind answered tonight, so I can go back to citizens who have been asking me the same questions and expelling this kind of money. It needs to be done. There is no question about this. But my concern is that business plan, which I haven't seen yet, and how are we gonna generate to get to, God willing, a self-sufficient position. I thought about corporate. I mean, we have more CEOs, CFOs, and every acronym of that group in town. And I know for a fact that they have, corporate meetings. They're going to places that we're talking about tonight that the hall needs to do to get those people in there. I mean, I think that's a lost, we're not really pushing on that. But as I said, these are things you can discuss later when you have your plans at your next meeting. But I'm just concerned about that generation of wealth that, to be self-sufficient and to get into, in my head, I'm thinking this is, again, I said it earlier, 14, 15, 16, 17 million when it's done. So I have to feel good as a small business person, and you're coming to me and asking for this amount of money. is this, in good faith, something that, according to your plan, it could be, this project is gonna be, what, 3 years if it's approved?
2 years construction.
2 years construction?
Yeah.
So let's just say, the way things are done today, let's just, for argument's sake, let's just say 3 years. So Suzanne, I think what you're saying is you can't start from that point, rightfully so, because you don't have the product to sell. It could be another 3 years, so now you're talking 6 years,
If I may,
and that's if.
Yep. It's our intention to begin this immediately, this effort
It
to
is.
identify, oh yes, not to wait. And no, we need to, when this, yeah,
Go
we
right
need,
to it.
no, we need to have the plan in place, hopefully the people identified in place that are going to then execute a 3-year plan that we are going to develop based on all this kind of research and consultation that I indicated was going to have to take place with, you know, cultural tourism experts and talent reps and the like.
Okay.
Yeah.
And John, I know.
You know where my heart is.
You've been very good with the board, you've been involved with the board, I remember back in the 90s it was, and I think even back then, we had those discussions about the very points you're talking. And the thing that comes back to my mind constantly on this is, in a sense, we're not really strictly a business. We have other roles to fill. There's a lot of discounts we give to other charities. We're sort of, in a way, a hybrid. I take your point. We should get as much revenue as we can, but we are not purely a profit-making institution.
And I get that it belongs to the community. I get that whole concept, but
Yeah, well, that's the tricky line we walk.
It is a tricky line.
And it's, we have sort of a mixed mission, really. One, support the hall, keep it in good repair, and 2, serve the community. So, again, I do take your point very closely about, you know, sharpening our marketing efforts, getting more events in, but we do have another role as well.
has anybody ever had some thoughts, and I've always said, and it's a proven fact, you know, when I moved in town 38 years ago, downtown is not what it is today. And there were so many ideas of bringing shops into the downtown. I always said, you can bring all the shops you want into downtown, it's not gonna survive unless you have food and alcohol. Sure and heck, we get food and alcohol, now the shops are thriving, it's working. What are the odds of I'm just a pizzeria, or who knows, something on that ground floor, something that's gonna draw traffic in there that could bring in other people that would say, geez, I've never been in here before, this is great. You know what, I might think about renting the upstairs or doing something else. Hey, I'm just throwing this out.
That is somewhat confusing as far as, I understand your idea, and the end results are great, but as to the different usages and the programs you want to develop, that could create a conflict of usage. But again, I've always been aware of your thinking on this.
I know you have, yeah.
Because you still do it every year. And you're right, that's something we really have to look into. But again, I come back to the dual mission that the hall was set up for. So that's one we honor. on that.
Suzanne's ready to jump.
I'm not actually contradicting Fred, but.
It won't be the first time.
No,
The last
but
time.
it's that kind of idea that I was referring to when I talked about potential commercial partnerships. You know, it might not be locating someone permanently in there,
That's
but
what I
can
meant,
we
yeah.
have an ongoing relationship with someone who would periodically, or could it be pop-up shops, or, you know, coincident with certain events. It's that kind of wide range thinking that we're going to have to engage in order to, you know, really make this vibrant and viable.
If I may. We are currently talking, and Joan is talking with them as well, a local, well-known downtown restaurant to use the hall during the week for catering events where they don't have the space to do. And that, I think, is
Yes,
exactly what
exactly.
you're talking about. So we have our ears and eyes open for that, and, you know, we jump at opportunities like that, and hopefully you will see the results of that fairly soon at the hall. So, but I was just thinking again about a permanent business. I think would not give us the flexibility we would need.
I see the point.
Yeah.
But I do think, John, just to add on, when the presentation of the business plan is given, there should be concreteness around these revenue-generating ideas that have been vetted due to market size, revenue-generating capabilities, all those good items. So I think that's fair, and
Absolutely.
certainly, I'm sure our team will dive in more when the business plan is presented.
Yeah, exactly, and just the experience, if this deal goes through, that'll give us a little more insight as to what the actual value is, you know, as far as the market goes for renting and using the hall, which of course will be incorporated in the business plan, so we will get a better idea, and then make it be more of an educated guess.
Ed, I think you had your hand raised earlier?
Yes, just very quickly, I agree with John, at least in principle, for once, that.
I'm glad this is being recorded, Mr. Hanson.
I think this is pretty easy to sell to the town as far as a renovation of the building. That's easy to see, and we know that's gonna cost money. But the question that everybody is gonna have is the economic viability question. And I think we need to define self-sufficiency, because I hear John, and you know, it sounds like he would like to have it on a paying basis where we'd never have to give you another dime.
No,
You guys are specifically saying cover ordinary expenses and sort of build an endowment, which I think is a more
Right,
realistic
absolutely,
thing.
and yes.
I think it would help all of us, and I guess I will ask you, Mr. Chairman, if it's possible, can we get a copy of Suzanne's speech so that we can look at that?
Yep, and we have it, and we'll certainly circulate it to all for the materials to reference.
Great, thank you.
Meredith?
Would the hall be a candidate, this might be for Connor or Stephanie, for a program like Mass Development PACE for the renovation?
I'm not familiar.
I don't know. I want to say I don't think so, but I can look into that.
I know that they just did a couple, I think they did a $9 million one up in Greenfield, I believe.
And is that a loan, or is that a grant?
It's
think
a
Mass
low.
development's usually loans.
It's a low-interest loan program,
Mhm.
and the town actually voted to participate in the program. It's property assessed clean energy is what PACE stands for.
Mhm.
And it will pay for structural energy efficiencies. So when I say structural, they have to be incorporated into the property, and that's where you get the property assessed.
Mhm.
So where the presentation indicated the heating and cooling systems, that was sort of the trigger for
Yeah.
me for thinking that this might
Great
be a
point.
possibility. I can create a
it
liaison
would be.
for conversation about that too with them.
I can check it. I have all that information on the PACE program.
Just very quickly, going on what Meredith is saying, HVAC is important. Yeah, it's pretty stuffy in there in the summer, but I ran a winter market in there, and between Fred and I rushing to shut the doors all the time, so that everybody wouldn't freeze, it took a lot of energy. One of the good parts about the Beacon project at Shovel Shop was their strong attention to, what is it, LEED certification?
Read, yeah.
And what's gonna happen in that area at the hall? Is there still gonna be a damn draft through that front door?
Yeah, I know, I hear you. Can we get the closer really working on that? Well, Doug is LEED certified, so, you know, he knows this system up and down. But I think that what we're thinking about is really energy efficiency, you know, good insulation, really thinking about creatively about thermal glazing, storm windows and so on. Yeah, it would be great to have an airlock, but again, you know, we've got the considerations of a preservation restriction and a national landmark. But yeah, we hear you on that, Ed, we hear you.
Yeah, the LEED plaque on the building is certainly nice to have. I'm a bigger fan of going after the utility company rebate programs and the incentive programs to actually get cash back for the equipment that you're putting into the building.
Tim knows quite well that the library has a system where they put in an airlock in the wintertime and take it out for the rest of the year.
And that's a good old-fashioned New England technique, you know, it can actually be if you will, a carbuncle on the outside of the building, but that's something to really think about, because I hear your point.
And, you know, God knows we've spent enough meetings, the trustees, thinking of various things. We've had contractors come out. We've got, you know, stone walls this thick. It's got an arch top. It's not that we haven't looked into things. And frankly, what's worked out the best in these large parties and open houses is you just have somebody there, a kid or something, no, literally who closes the door.
That's how the
You would-
Scouts
you would
did it
be-
on
you-
Sunday, yep.
You would be amazed. People walk in 25-degree weather, they just leave the door wide open. I don't get it. So we finally decided the only way we can do this is have someone there close the door. So it's a primitive solution, but it works.
I'm trying to, I'll go for it.
I think it'd tend to sell better to a number of people in the town if there was some type of provision to provide funds back to the CPC in repayment of the loan, rather than just build reserves in a 501c3. You know, that, to the extent you're generating funds, you know, and that's above your operating costs, some of that should be paid back or could be paid back.
Well, that, interesting enough, was the original deal. It was made back in 1881. If we had an excess, it would go to the town. If we had a deficit, the town would pay us. Maybe we could revisit that.
Something just to provide a willingness to provide back toward that substantial amount.
Well, the other way we look at it, you know, it's not argumentative here or anything, but if we do have an endowment, that would preclude us from going, our real goal is not to go back to the town and ask for more money. We've got our capital assets, building, everything is be fine, the major expenses, not gonna happen.
Well, what if you
Unless-
limited the reserve? What if you said, you know, agreed to the CPC, we'll build up a reserve over time? That way, all parties could agree to that, and then that would facilitate, or could facilitate sharing between the hall and the town or the CPC.
And if I could, I apologize, but Alan, I think it might be a better forum for us to debate that as the committee.
Okay.
And then that way we reach consensus, and then we can go back
Okay.
with our stipulations.
I just wanted to get his feeling, that's all.
That's
Thank you.
fair.
It's a good question.
Would it might be it worked for a moment.
It did work for a moment.
Yeah, no, I think it's good.
Because it did come up.
Yeah, it did. Maybe if you try plugging it into yours. I did, yeah.
This is the trustees plan to the shop.
Perfect.
Likes me.
Yeah, do you want to try and pass over one more time, and I'll see if I can connect it?
Yeah, did you just have like a loose connection maybe?
I don't know.
It's here, right?
Yeah, it's right off to the. Why don't you, do you mind if I use your computer?
Not at all.
Perfect. I'll pivot. So team, first of all, let me say thank you, to the presentation today. It's clear that you folks put a tremendous amount of effort in, and I appreciate that you folks all came down in support. I also want to say thank you to the team that put this together here following Ham Hall. So it's great to see everybody, and I know a lot of people put effort in. And also along the way, the town has done a great job of being great partners, even to the fact of the DPW helping, doing some digging at the site to understand what the architecture of the soil and the substrate looked like. So it's been a truly collaborative process where a lot of people deserve a lot of thanks. I also had the responsibility to help us pivot, right? And I'll try to illustrate my point. If I do a good job, I won't take up a ton of our time, but I'll help us, I think, begin to pivot into discussion points like one that you raised, Al, that I think we have to make sure we explore. The first is, let's see if I can do this right. For my screen, when I type in Easton, Mass, I get the picture of the hall, right? And the reason why I bring this up is I think we all know that this is a feel-good project for a lot of reasons. It's a part of our town's history. It's a part of the fabric of who we are. If we don't believe it, Google says it, so it must be even more true. We all probably have our own personal stories about the hall. I know my family ultimately settled there because of driving down through downtown. I grew up in Malden where we had a Richardson library. And so when I came through here, it meant a lot to me. What I really also want to understand is that we know this is a generational impacting project, right? Like, if we do this right, it could take a parcel of land, a historic property, and make it so that future generations get to enjoy it in different but also similar ways to ones that we got to enjoy. I acknowledge a couple things. One, you're right, John, I can guarantee you it's not a $10 million project, guarantee you. And that's because the debt service on $10 million over 20 years at 4.5%, which is nice, is $5.2 million. So fundamentally, a $10 million ask is $15.2 million if we bond it for 20 years. And that's part of where I want to pivot us, because I do think we have a responsibility and an obligation to ensure that the money that we may extend in support of this, whatever that may be, has great value for the return for our residents. The debt service on $15.2 million is $770,000 a year. That's 1/3 of the money we take in. That's huge. That effectively precludes you from another project of that size, even close to that size, till 2030. So I would ask this committee not just to think about the merits of this particular project, but ask you to think of it in the context of the projects that may come before you, that you will be forced economically and financially to say no to. That doesn't mean that this project should or shouldn't be garnered in that light, but I'm just gonna ask you to think broadly about that, because it's just a financial reality of how much this would cost. Couple things. One, and this goes a little bit into what you were speaking about, Al, and certainly I think a lot of us brought up different points along the way. So if I do this right, coalition. The Community Preservation Coalition is a preservation org. The coalition is an amazing resource, and I know I've brought it up to everybody. But I do want you to feel free, and I mean this in its deepest sense, to know that it is absolutely, if I can find the right one, not only appropriate and okay, but I think our responsibility to make sure our grant agreement is as ironclad as you possibly can make it. And a grant agreement is not something new. I think, have you all participated in a grant agreement for us? ShovelWorks was a grant agreement, so for those of us that were here. So a grant agreement is the rules, the stipulations, the conditions that we feel are critical for the offering of the money. And they can be anything. Can't be illegal, clearly. But they can be, we need payback, as you brought up. That's fair. That happened with the shovel parks. It could be that you require and want to understand how you can ensure that the town's residents have representation that Suzanne spoke about. So we have worked, and I give credit to Suzanne and Fred, town, in a collaborative way to try to understand what some of these stipulations may be and to try to mold them in a way that worked for all parties. But at the end of the day, we have the responsibility to develop a grant agreement that is contingent to be satisfied before money can be given. There can even be clawback. and I'm not saying there should be, by the way, I'm not advocating, I'm simply trying to set up guardrails for our discussion and debate. But there can be clawback that says if certain things aren't done over time, then we are due back funds. Now, I'm not sure if that's necessarily valid in all situations. Sometimes if the money's gone, the money's gone. If it's not generating enough, you can't get it back. But there are some also simple things, like if the building's sold, what if, I'm making this up, but what if next year it was sold and it was converted into a warehouse for auto parts? Not saying it will be, completely making it up. But we have a right to make sure we put things like that in. That we're not doing this for a 3-year deal, we're doing this for and you all can insert time, that says if this happens, we get paid back because it's no longer in keeping with the intent of what the grant was designed to generate, right? So I bring this up only because, and I don't know if we will get to all this tonight, honestly. I bring it up so that you have a resource after you leave tonight, that you can go see other grants and get ideas. I am not a lawyer in any way, shape, or form, but I've been in enough negotiations where the parties feel great, and we want it, and we like it, and it's good, it's helping people, the community, everything about that is good. The important thing from our perspective is I think we have to make sure we develop as much as we can expectations and guarantees that the residents of the community will get their return for what we may contemplate doing. Is that fair? Any apologies for the preamble, but I just think it's really important so that you have resources and you understand the level of detail. So there are a lot of examples, clawback agreements, housing trusts, so on and so forth, different types. And I would encourage you to read them. I read through a handful of them, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. Let me see. No doubt 11 grants, so we've talked about how much previously. There were 11 grants previously, and I'm just going through a little bit of the application that I think is relevant. 11 grants totaling $2 million that go back to 2013, if I remember the application, 2011. So we know why we're here. We appreciate that there's been asks along the way, and I give credit to the hall for putting together a comprehensive plan in 2015, and we're trying to figure out where this fits. Let's see. In terms of the agreements, just the language that I normally have experienced is it's trust but verify, right? And I want to make sure that's important. Like, it's not that there isn't trust, but it's our way to make sure we verify and, where possible, guarantee what the outcome is, the intent of the money. There's something else that struck me, and I think it's come up strewn in some of the commentary, especially John Strong in yours. So if I can, I'll go to this location, because part of me wants to understand what right looks like. And I think some people have said, you know, what does 15 million get you? I know we said 10 earlier, but it's really 15 million in my mind, if we talk about what that financing cost is. And this is, I've come across these people. Has anybody on the committee been to the Spire Center or heard of the Spire Center? So the Spire Center is in Plymouth, pretty similar in terms of, I guess I'd say what I feel like the story is. So the Greater Plymouth Performing Arts Center, it's a nonprofit organization, 2010, history. There's actually a video at the bottom that I can play. And if you'll indulge me, it's, I think, 2 minutes, 27. Oh, I probably won't. Do I not get volume?
I don't know if the speaker's on.
You go.
I think this.
Right from the beginning was make this the best place to hear music anywhere. First, there's no sightline impediments, but even more so, we used an acoustic engineer right from the beginning to make sure we had a perfect reverb in here. And it was built for sound to begin with. And then we put in a tremendous sound system that's unlike many others anywhere else too. What we've done with our lighting system is, first of all, starting off with our lighting production people, Woody Bavoda, who goes back to the 60s, working with some of the big rock acts at that point, and has brought in a lot of his expertise. I see a lot of, in lighting today, of technically people doing things proficient, but not artistically like Libby or John and some of our lighting people do, because they can take all the technical improvements we made here and put in, but really interpret it in an artistic fashion that brings it out a lot more than I normally see at other places.
The history of this place is definitely something we want to preserve. So as a nonprofit, by Gold Pass members and people supporting the arts, showing up, buying tickets, you're allowing us to continue the legacy and preserve the place for generations to come.
And we're bringing in a cultural asset to this community. What it's done to the downtown center and real estate, people oftentimes cite that they would love to live downtown because they can just walk to the Spire, walk to a restaurant. What we've done for the hospitality industry has just been amazing. They're coming here to stay in the hotels, they're going to the bars, they're going to the restaurants. They're bringing a life to downtown that wasn't there before. We've done a great job inside over the last 8 years. We've spent about $1 million. We're willing to do a $3 million preservation project on the outside that'll make this look like it was built when it was 1884. So there's been a number of benefits to the town to have the Spire Center here. Beyond that, we want to continue to increase diversity of the acts, of the audience that are coming in here. We really like to support up-and-coming acts too, for the way we treat our fans, our audiences, and the way we treat our performers. It really creates an experience that if you went and saw the same act someplace else, it would not be the same as seeing it at the Spire Center.
So, team, I bring that up because I think it speaks to a bigger picture that we have to explore and make connections, and I think it adds greater value. So, and I'll use this page hopefully to illustrate it. So you saw the size, hopefully, of the church, right? Small parcel, not huge, downtown, right? Their schedule of events, names like the TD Bank Lobby Series, December 8th, 9th, 10th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 30th. And I'm sure there would have been more, but there's a couple holiday weeks that are in there for a couple religions, right? Where I'm going with it is, if they hold 250 people and they're hosting 15 events a month, and I'm not saying we do or don't want that, but the economic vitality that creates in the community, the restaurant seats that it fills, the ability for us to create engagement downtown, like this could become an economic anchor. And I think it's a couple things. I challenge the OAMH team to show me that. For me, I like to see the connection in the community that says here, it's not just about we have another wedding. I think it's about, to your point, supporting the other local businesses, supporting a vibrant downtown, bringing people from outside of Easton and their money into Easton, exposing the goodness of Easton to more people. So, well, I'm not necessarily saying I want I was gonna call it the Tweeter Center and date myself, but Great Woods would be another dating of myself. The Xfinity Center, I think, is what it currently is. It might be different. Not looking for that. I think we have to be very thoughtful about noise, about neighbors, about those components. But I also think it's important that we consider what all the way to Bright might look like in terms of expectations. That's an institution that does very well, makes great money, appropriately applies for CPC preservation outside to handle a historic building. But, if you look at their lineup, if you look at their management structure, if you look at their board, but they also have people who actively operate and run it, I would ask that we think that way. Like, if there are things that we believe we should see that would help us understand that we are, and if you agree, after your review, doesn't have to be tonight, closer to this than who we have been, we should think about putting those things in. And so, I think that there's a lot of components. There's probably a real estate angle. Meredith, I'm gonna hope you're gonna give us every single grant agreement component that relates to usage of land, concerns about neighbors, all those things that you've just naturally learned. John, Al, you've got great business components that you've already brought up. I'm not sure which ones fly. We're gonna have to vote on which ones go into the agreement. Ed, there's historical angles that, I know, Ed, you were there, but when we were talking about the path in the back, for example, we were talking as a team about, well, can we use it as teaching and learning? Can we put in items about Easton's history so that as people are going through the walk and they have that overlook pause, is there something educational about Shovelworks there? So I think there's a lot of components, and I just wanna free you all, nothing is off the table. We have to come to an agreement as a team, and I think in doing so, not only will it inform the grant agreement, it will inform our support of it fundamentally. So hopefully this is illustrative. This is, again, the Spire Center. I encourage you all to take a look at it. They've done a great job of commercializing their property, creating engagement. They also have facility rentals, different items. So again, I just came across this because I don't assume to know whether or not a business plan is good. You know, if there's another business out there that's crushing it, I'd like to just go look at them too, to learn. So I would encourage the OAMH team to think about that, if there are components that make sense to include in what you're trying to do that generate support for the business plan you're trying to put together. But I would just give you guys that example. Go for it.
I think it's a great idea, Tom. I mean, I was at the Tom Rush concert. I actually, a good majority of the attendees weren't familiar to me, not that I know everybody, because I don't, but I think there was a lot of people that came in from out of town. To your point, you're bringing in more money to downtown. I loved the concert. I thought it was phenomenal. I don't like to see it as just a one-off. I think this is actually a great idea, and it would be something that would propel us far better than just relying on a wedding or a bar mitzvah, whatever the case may be. This is, I really like this idea, and I was gonna bring it up, and you stole my thunder, Tom. We're on the same page. Again, everything's on the table, and I think that these are things that we have to compromise and propel forward, because I think we're all in agreement. We love this building, we wanna get it done, but we gotta have that plan to, you know, not, to your point, Tom, that, excuse me, that, well, maybe we can do this, and after this is all done, in 6 years, you know, 3 years for the project, and then to get it up to snuff. I think we can, you know, this is something you can get going, thinking about it now. Yeah, no, but I'm saying, no, Joe, no, I agree with what you're saying.
I know I can't talk now.
No,
I'm sitting
but
here
no, wait.
on my hands.
No.
Because I just have to say, no one has worked harder on that aspect of the business than Fred. On theater, on music. That's how we got Tom Rush. I mean, that's a whole part of our plan. And that's not a new concept, and I'm
No, I
sorry
know
if
it's
I'm
not.
in trouble for speaking.
No, you're not in
But I
trouble.
have to
That's
say,
trouble.
no one is working harder on that than him.
No,
So
and
have
but
to
that's
say that.
what I'm saying, to that level. I
Oh,
mean,
that's how we got Tom Rush. I can't tell you the
but
people that
in
we're
regards to
talking
projects
with
like,
right
you know,
now.
artists like this, where they're having, how
Yeah.
many did you say, Tom? There was 7 or 8 in 1 month?
That was just
There was
December
15, there was
yeah.
15. But that is exactly what we wanna do, because you can't just rely on the weddings and the bar
Exactly,
mitzvahs.
that's to my point.
And we know that. We're very, very aware of that. And I'm
And-
sorry, I'll sit on my hands and
One of the
I won't speak again.
No, that we want
Appreciate
you.
the info.
One of the nice things about the hall is you have your two performance areas. And, you know, you could maybe do something creative, coffee house kind of ideas for that first floor on the weekends, whatever. There's a lot of possibilities. That's your job, fantastic. I have a thing, I look at the Spire Center, and as you pointed out, there's no parking. One of the things that Plymouth has is a huge amount of municipal parking, which makes me think that if you want payback on the hall, are we saddling them with a municipal parking lot?
In what way?
Well, I mean, you know, we're gonna have $700,000 in debt service on a $15 million thing. But that's not all benefiting the hall, it's benefiting the library and the town as well. So is there a way that we can make that clear to people as well, that they're getting a benefit beyond helping the hall?
I think that's fair. I think it is a community benefit without question. in terms of the cost structure, I think the parking lot's minor and the lease is being given at $1, which is kind. So it's not adding much to the debt service for the lease. But I think that's a fit, no doubt that I believe the parking lot and the campus connection is a mutual community benefit.
The other thing in Plymouth is they have those darn parking meters in the municipal lot, so something we can always think about if we need revenue.
John?
What's the town parking lot hold? How many cars?
The whole neighborhood.
Well, behind the village, you know,
The one in back of the children's.
children's museum.
It's a good question. I don't know exactly how many spots it
I mean, it's a fairly good size.
Yeah, I would imagine it's about the same as
Yeah.
what we're talking about
50?
here.
Yeah, I was gonna say 40 or 50,
Yeah.
but
And
maybe
it's
Stephanie or
always-
Wayne, would you
Yeah,
mind
we
just
can get
following
that.
up and
Yeah.
sharing that?
I mean,
with
that's an
us?
easy, you can make that very attractive in like a trolley or whatever.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
And it's 9:10, so I'm thoughtful of time. A couple things. One, want to make sure we know that we're in this, we'll take whatever time it takes, whatever meetings it takes. If we can't get there for the upcoming May town meeting, then maybe it's the fall special meeting. And I'm not saying we're delaying, I'm simply saying that I have a tremendous amount of questions I'm going to ask this committee to consider, and I'm sure you'll all have your own. I have some very broad strokes, categories, and I appreciate Suzanne alluding to them. One of them for me is, what is the representation of the residents of the community in the organization, and how should that present itself? Is it board membership, and if it's board membership, how many, and who should be on it? Should somebody from the historical commission be on it? Should somebody from the CPC be on it? So things like that, so that what we're doing is we're inserting transparency, oversight, and engagement on behalf of the towns people who are investing this, as a example of meaningful change in the structure of the organization. We should talk about that. It might mean different things to you. Suzanne did a great example of illustrating a couple. One, should we give open meetings where residents from the town can come and join a board meeting 4 times a year, quarterly in this example, but it could be something different, so that at that point, they get an update on the financial performance, the not just financial performance, but also the mission performance. Like, what is the mission that will be stated? And do they feel like that way they are in the know about their 10, 15, insert number, million here, investment? And that doesn't go away. They have a right to learn what their investment is doing and generating. In theory, they have a say a bit about how that investment is being invested and the return that's being generated by being on the board and the strategic vision, the opportunity to set strategic vision, right? Some of the other items would include, or could include, when the construction needs to be done by. Might include what happens if it's more than 10 million. Might include that there's a requirement for them to bring money to the table. Might include, and Al, I'm not advocating, but using your point, that they pay some back. Might include discussion about the structure of the operating team that's there. So all of those items are items I'm going to ask you to specifically engage on and to ask your opinion on, and that way we can codify it through a grant agreement, and that way it becomes, this is what we need to get back as a CPC, as representatives of the residents of our community, in order to give this amount of money, understanding what that would do for us. The other thing, just as ideas, and I haven't floated this, but I think it's obvious and apparent to everybody, is it everything that was on that list that added up to 10 million? I don't know. If we come to the conclusion that there are certain elements that are prioritized and important for the benefit of the residents of the town, then maybe it's not everything now. Maybe it's what we believe is a necessary investment to create the start, but that the finish comes at some point down the road. That might mean it's 8 of 10, it might mean it's 9 of 10, it might be all 10, it might be 5 of 10. I'm not sure. But I would ask you all to go back to the master plan that Ed probably knows by heart, and think about all those other priority projects that are listed. Because there's some big ones that are expensive. And so, again, I can't make it just about this one, it has to be holistically what we've been planning for and set as priorities. Doesn't mean we can't get to another one or something else, but if you do the math, and probably at the next meeting, I'll share with you the financial picture of what it would look like if we assume this project. For the next 25 years, Wendy's done a great job working against it already. I just want to make sure we have an opportunity to review it and present it at the next meeting so that you can see what that looks like. What else? Strategic planning, that was another one that came up. So might have to, we have it listed as maintaining a 3-year strategic plan. Somebody might say that's good, that's enough. To me, candidly, from my experience, when somebody says do a 5-year plan, it's the first 3 that count. And I've never been accurate in 20 years, and it might be a self-reflection on year 5. So still trying to achieve that. But I think a 3-year plan is reasonable. And I do think it should be post when everything's done, because that's what we're really talking about. What is, hopefully the business plan conveys what the vision is. And it doesn't have to be the Spire Center, but I can wrap my head around that, if that makes sense. I can understand 15 events, the seating's about 225 people. I can tell you that of the 10 events I looked at, 7 of them were approximately 85% sold out. I can do good math, and the tickets are 20 to 30 bucks. So if you're banging out 15 events each month, 200 seats, 30 bucks, $6 grand, times 15, 100 grand in events alone, I kind of get that. It's a business, right? Like I would, when I think of investment in a business perspective, you're looking at a 3 to 5 year return. Definitely not looking for that here. There are a lot of different soft reasons for why this project shouldn't be calculated from a business perspective. But I think there is a point that, yeah, I can wrap my head around a 1.2 million in events only, let alone the weddings, let alone the other items. That helps me feel like, yeah, they can hire a staff that's professional, that they can go to market with, that they can go and get, if they wanted to, a TD Bank lobby series that is exciting, brings in different genres and generations of activity and engagement. And by the way, complete credit to Fred's point, still lets us do the Sunday Boy Scout brunch that helps our community. We get the benefit of all those things that I think make indelible memories for so many people in our community. And we've got a business that happens to go on the side that helps us address the future long-term hope. I apologize. I know I've done a lot of talking. A, I think as chair it's probably part of my job, but B, I've had a lot of time to digest this, and we've had a lot of meetings. So I give credit to all of those team members to participate in those.
Tom, just a quick question. It's been a long time since I've asked. What's the cost to rent the hall? For non-resident and resident?
If you're a resident and you want to rent downstairs, the first floor, it's going to cost you $1,000. After your event, you don't hang from the lights and do damage, $225 will come back to you. If you're a non-resident, slightly higher, a little bit more than $100 higher than that for a non-resident of Easton. Conversely, you want to rent the entire hall. As a non-resident, you're going to pay $4,500 up front. After the event, same thing, you don't damage the hall, $700 is going to come back to you. You want to rent the second floor, non-resident, $3,500 versus $3,200 as a resident, $500 will come back to you. So it's very competitive pricing. And, pardon me?
Boy Scouts get it.
The Boy Scouts, I mean, that's a whole different.
It is very,
that's a whole
for
different
historical.
thing. I mean, that's making it legal and collecting $100 or $125. But there's also, besides the musical part of it, the people that come to the hall to rent it for various events. There's 2 types of people that come in, and it's not all price, all based on price. There's people who want to come in and they want a white box and you're not going to provide the caterer for me and the flowers and the band, and I'm not just gonna sign here, that's what they want. But the people who rent the hall come in and they want the Harry Potter showers, they want the feeling of the hall and the wood and the dramatic staircase to take their, their photos. So it's very competitive, but if we improve the hall, then those prices, easily, and I'm probably gonna get in trouble for saying this, could very easily probably be doubled, honestly.
I guess you'd have to make the comparison of, you're giving up that Saturday, which would probably be the prime going to this point of a concert series, which you do on a Saturday too.
Yeah,
So there's a
so
lot of thoughts.
you have to balance how many of those you're gonna have versus how many community events, how many full paid events you're gonna have to make it make sense.
What we did, you might remember the music series we did about 20 years ago, which was seasonal, it was on Sundays, that way we were able to maintain Saturdays for weddings. Well, there weren't that many weddings in the summer. But yeah, we can shuffle it around, and we've done that before with the music, with performances, and coexisting with weddings, so.
Okay, Suzanne?
Make one point,
Please.
that, I hate to say it, pointed out, but, Lynn's pricing did not take into consideration the kind of stage, lighting, sound system that the Spire Center has. And so if we're, if you'd like to see us go in this route, it's gonna be additional big bucks. And you don't have to go to the Spire Center to see something state-of-the-art. Take yourself over to the Southeastern Vocational Technical School, because Joan and I went over there as soon as that opened. They put literally millions of dollars into a performance center there, just so that their kids could learn what it's like to operate a facility like that. They had folks literally who came in from Hollywood to help them with lighting, soundboard. You wouldn't believe it. It's more than the Spire Center even has. But they can't make any money on it because they won't sell alcohol there. And it's a huge investment. And my point is, you don't have to go far to see an example of what it would take to outfit the hall.
Appreciate that. So I guess what I would say is, and that's fair, and from my perspective, I'll speak for me, I'm not directing at all what I think your business plan should be. What I want to receive is a business plan that to me makes sense, and if it was like the Spire, I could wrap my head around that. It may be about something else, but I'll ask you to my head has to be wrapped around it that says, okay, it's 15, it could be 15 events of flower arranging. And I mean that sincerely, like whatever you folks think fits your building and your style, but at the end of the day, the activity in, I think what we're trying to articulate has to generate a certain amount of economic results. And so it could be all weddings. I only use the Spire Center to show a smaller building, a smaller parcel. It can be done. And I think that's part of the magic recipe, right? Two guys got into it and started to do search on the internet, and Google won. And they won because they had a great business plan, a great product, they hired great people, and they went to market, executed well, were successful, and dominated, right? So I think that's what I'm just using the Spire to help this team appreciate the world of what might be possible. What for you, that's where we're consciously looking for you to tell us what your world of possibility will look like. I think that's fair. That's why I think we're looking for the business plan at some point.
Could you clarify exactly when you think this business plan should be prepared? Because one of the points that I made is that we've got to do a lot of market research to figure out whether artists are going to come here. Who else are we putting ourselves in competition with in this area?
Yeah.
And so we can't tell you that by January. We've got to talk to to arts organizations, to talent reps, to the folks that handle Tom Rush and a host of other artists, many of whom who appeared at the Spire Center. So we can tell you what we're going to be doing over the next couple of years to get to the point of creating a strategic plan, but it includes all of this market research and consultation, et cetera.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
what
so-
is it that you're looking for by January?
Yeah,
Can you
so
be
from my
specific?
perspective, and maybe this is appropriate where I helped give us some latitude. I personally, I'll speak for myself, but I couldn't move forward unless all of that was done. So that we knew that your business plan was substantiated by market research, so that when we are making this investment on behalf of the residents, that it's grounded upon that type of information. And I appreciate your commentary, you're spot on. I went to school for entrepreneurship, written business plans, and literally just wrote one and presented one the last year in front of a bank, 2 banks that were very strict. Show me your market research. Help me understand when you did it. Explain to me the seasonality patterns. Why do you think you would be in this case when you have competition in the surrounding 7 towns? Tell us your competition in the surrounding 7 towns. What's their pricing? When are they open? How many fields? What are they doing? All that good stuff. All the things that you just said would be required for an investment of money. And I myself would be looking to see that that's been done. So that way, whatever your vision comes back to, that this is our sweet spot, this is where we want to drive and engage in the community and create economic results, we have some proof that says, yeah, it makes sense, that we've done competitive pricing. I would recommend no less than 3, sometimes 5. It's usually just a rule of thumb most people come back with. 1 is usually not enough for most people. But those are the things that we would be looking for you to help us manage our expectations. And I can't speak for the committee, but I know for me, when I assess a business plan, I will be asking those questions. Sure.
I think when you look at the Spire Center, you have to consider the fact that there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 staff members. Right now, in terms of the hall, there are 4 or 5 or 6 volunteers.
Yeah.
So you don't have the same level of participation as you would in a Spire Center type of situation.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So what is the budget on a Spire Center? What are they paying salaries? How much do they pay the lighting guy? How much do they pay the sound guy?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of considerations there too.
1 second, and then you'll be next. Sure. I think that's a fantastic question. And as a matter of fact, one of the discussion points that we've had as a team leading into this in the TRC was, what does that future organizational structure look like?
Right.
Because I think you're spot on. I can give you my independent assessment. You're not built to grow in the way that we're hopeful you are, given the current structure. I don't know the Spire Center, and by the way, we're using them as a proxy. There probably are a lot of examples, but one of the things I've done in the past is to go to somebody and say, you weren't always like this. How did you start? And they may say, look, the number 1 thing that you need to do is you need to go out and make sure that you get a capital campaign manager. Maybe. I'm not saying you should. I am absolutely not giving you advice. But what I am saying is that there's a difference between who you are today, who I would think we aspire for you to be in the future after a $15 million investment, and we're asking you to bridge that gap. And I can't give you that. I think it's inappropriate for me to give you that answer. I don't mind articulating ideas. But you might call that guy, Bob, from the Spire Center and say, listen, we're far enough away that we're not competition. But how did you do it? You were a church. You were a nonprofit church. Did you? And they may say, you know what, had an angel investor, gave us $5 million, got us started. Well, all right, that's going to be hard, but thank you. Or they may say, you know what, we started kind of small. It took 3 to 5 years before we were able to get up to 15 events, but once we got up to a critical mass, it just became a flywheel, right? And I don't have those answers for you. That's the work I think you all need to do. That way, and if I'm speaking for anybody else, please jump in. I don't intend to. But this is just me speaking now. I can't speak on behalf of the committee. I would encourage them to add their thoughts. But there are a lot of ways that you can quote unquote get smart about a particular challenge, especially when other people might give you some of those answers. Ed, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you, business plans, et cetera, et cetera. But we've had an issue like this in town before. We have a 1,200-seat auditorium in the town, which is completely underutilized. We were supposed to have a 1,000-seat auditorium, and the argument was if we add the other 200 seats, we would then be able to get these mid-range performers to come in, et cetera, and it's never happened.
Sure.
So, let's say that that was a business plan. The point back here, you need the staff
Mhm.
to make that work, and maybe at this point, you'd wanna hire somebody to start doing this, because it seems like Tom's asking an awful lot for volunteers.
And I think that, I'm sorry, I think that would be part of your business plan. Like, I would think at some, like, they're gonna probably propose that they, I know that they've worked with some grant, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Fred, but I think you have brought on somebody who does grant writing for you.
Yes, yes. And again, it takes a while to, you know, you talked about a flywheel, and that gets straight to the point of volunteers versus paid staff.
Mhm.
And, you know, if there's any agreement where you're specifying, you know, you must employ a full-time, and you're talking about your grant agreement, that's just unrealistic. You know, it takes a while to grow. I mean, talking with Spire people, it took them 10 years. And what they did with their founders is they had people who were very well connected to the music business. Everybody has their advantages. That just happened to be what Spire was. And also, I think the location. You could see where it was. It was in a very densely populated area which already has attractions, the ocean, the Mayflower, all that. So again, all those factors have to be taken into account.
Sure.
I mean, we can go around and around on this, and I think it's something we can discuss at the next one, but just a point. I, you know, have known some people in the music industry where they'll come in and actually work for zero, but work on a commission. So they have a vested interest in that profit, and it's a hefty profit in comparison to if you just paid somebody a salary of, I'm just gonna throw a number out, $40,000 a year, $20,000 a year, whatever it may be, but there's no outlay as opposed to gearing towards what they get done, what they bring in. So it normally would be 10%, well, you're gonna have to come up with 25% because you're not paying me, so I want that he or she is gonna want a heftier number. I know that they do that. It's a fact, and it's just finding that right combination of people to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've used grant writers like that at the NRT also, where they get a percentage of the amount of money that they bring in.
And if people complain, they say, well, that's way too much money. Well, then pay me $40,000 a year. Well, I can't afford the $40,000, so, you know, this is what you do. I mean, to me, it's a great, you know, option.
You just gotta find that person.
So fair point. Why don't we put a pin in this? I guess what we're trying to articulate is that we're hopeful and look forward to seeing the business plan that hopefully fills in some of those questions. It bridges how you will go from who you are now to what you ultimately aspire to be, and whatever that looks like. That way we can respond to that and engage. And if we find it satisfies and is good, great. And if we find it's wanting or lacking, we'll advise. And that's the nature of I think the give and take. I will tip my hand a little bit just on my own things that I had the opportunity to prepare. One, I didn't see any letters of support in your application. So to the extent that you have letters of support, so the examples that come to mind, one, would really want to make sure the library is 110% on board. That's a really big abutter, and I think a very critical component of the campus connection that has been proposed. The Chamber of Commerce would be a good one, so that after you've explained to them what you aspire to be and the business plan you want to put forth, does the Chamber of Commerce and local businesses support that? I think that would be helpful and impactful as well, and maybe even other abutters. And those are just items that came to quick mind, so again, tilting my hand just a little bit. What else? I will say this to the team. So a couple things to consider. One, with this dollar magnitude, we will most likely have to seek counsel on it. It's money being given to a private entity, and bonding this level of monies is incredibly large, and it will be scrutinized. And we will most likely have to engage counsel on our side to make sure we do it in the right way. We also, most likely, given the size of this and the potential size of the amendment, might seek counsel for the grant amendment writing as well, to make sure that everything that we do stipulate and put in for consideration is appropriate, valid, and legal, so that it can be enforced. And again, we usually don't talk about these things when they're $50,000 playgrounds, but this is, again, at minimum, a $15.2 million ask. Questions that I would ask you to do, one is start to compile your list of what you think should be considered for discussion for the grant amendment or agreement. That way we can start to compile, bucketize, and try to come up with a logical way to digest them at our next meeting. I think it's fair that I do this. I don't want to violate anything, so I'm asking opinion as I look at Stephanie and anybody else in the room that can help me opine. Is it okay if people send me their list of their items and I
Yes.
compile that and bucket it
Yes,
so
it-
that I can present it at our next meeting for all of us to engage on?
Yes.
Perfect.
There can be no replies all or any kind of
No debate,
deliberation.
no discussion.
Right.
So if you could just send it to me, the things
Do
that are
not
important
copy
to you.
any of
No
the
copy
members.
anybody, it's not a dialogue, I won't come back at you. I might ask clarifying, but it's just so that, so I started today. Considerations, 2 people talked about noise requirement, I think 3 people talked about 3rd floor access. You can put in that 3rd floor access has to be in this. That might mean something else isn't, but if that's critically important to our committee, then we can talk about that. It's fair, everything is fair game. Self-sufficient came up a few times, should not have been on this list, but it was a great idea about mass development. Those are things that I would ask that you folks come to us with. We're happy to share, but I think to your point, and I appreciate that this is we are adding to the workload. I assure you the ask is great on both sides, but to the extent that there's a mass development loan that can help defray this, that would be great. I'm not sure there is, but those are great ideas. LEED certification, I'm not sure if it was LEED certification or Ed just wants to not have a draft in the building, but I think the draft part is absolutely valid. The LEED certification, I think, adds a tremendous amount of cost because this is not a LEED certified project. But
And it's so difficult to do it retrofitting and all that.
fair. You all have your packet of information that was presented tonight on the slides. I think this graphic was in it as well, but you might want to just start thinking about, are there structural components that matter to you? I know it's hard, and I'm not saying it's open season, Lynn, or a team, but your thoughts about this project in a way that you can then be aligned as to whether you do or do not support it, I think are important. So I would just ask you all, I think I said at the beginning of the meeting, I hope you slept well last night, but we're about to probably get busy too. I don't think it's just their team. I think on our side, we're doing the due diligence that validates standing in front of town meeting and recommending to our fellow residents whether or not we do invest $15 million. Or the very difficult task, which I think is equally as important, that we have the unfortunate circumstance to look at the applicant and say no. And I think we need to do the due diligence that would substantiate both of them along the way. It makes sense, I think, so that the next meeting would be, is it fair? Oh, go ahead, Al.
Just, I'm just trying to understand the no. Is there certain things that we could do? Let's say for instance, the town couldn't do $10 million right now or $15 million over lifetime, but is there a block of funds that would get you back in business, let you launch on this idea, but not do the whole thing right now? If you just had to pick critical areas of work.
Yes, we'd have to discuss that. I mean, I don't want to talk anything about it now, but
Right.
yeah, that could be an alternative, yes.
And I think that's fair. So, maybe in conjunction with the business plan presentation, there might be a presentation that discusses perhaps using the component list that Lynn provided, prioritization of 1, 2, and 3 of each of the items.
I would caution us that that's what we did before we asked them to roll everything up into one big ball. So it would be nice if we would be consistent, I think.
I think that's fair, Ed. The only counterpart that I would say is that we weren't here, not all of us were here when that was proposed. And so, I would agree that there's merit to all at once. But I also feel like, that people are chewing on the cost and perhaps what that impact might be.
And when I said that, what I meant was not some kind of phasing plan. We phased a number of projects over the years, but we knew that after a phase 1, there would be a phase 2.
Sure.
And I think that's a creative way to maybe approach this issue, considering what the bonding climate might be later on, et cetera, et cetera. But I would hate to go back to, here's half of the money that you need, and maybe we'll get the other half sometime coming down the road.
Sure. Yep. No, I think that's fair. I hear your reservation. I think unless, I feel it's okay to ask for a prioritization, just to know, in case that's where the board gets to, rather than getting to that point and then asking for prioritization. If there's 12 items, if there's a fair way to do it, and if the team comes back and says, the applicant can come back and say no. They can come back and say, it's all or nothing, and that's okay too. I think it's a fair ask if the applicant can do it. It would be helpful for you at least, Al, it would help me understand. But it also would impact their business plan, their ability to execute, right? So there's gonna be throttling on both sides. I think if you invest less, most likely their ability to leverage that investment for future benefit probably diminishes as well, otherwise they wouldn't have proposed it. But I think it's fair. Does anybody, if it's okay, we go through the exercise just to see it? I think, Ed, your reservations are absolutely and duly noted.
I think phases rather than prioritization.
Fair. So perhaps it would be phases.
Although the problem with phases, and we've done that before, by the time you get to the second phase, you're already 3-4 years down the road. Now that costs an extra $1 million or $2 million.
Yeah, and if Gregory would be pointing that out, that's a very good point.
So that's the issue with that. I mean, I'm an advocate if we can get to a point, get this done.
Yeah.
But again.
It's an awful lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. Yep. Harry, anything?
It's a lot of information.
It's a lot. Dennis?
I'm good.
Jim? Mr. Hans?
I'm fine.
Does it, so just asking the team, does it make sense that we break, we go back, you folks have an opportunity to digest the information, compile your lists of considerations, stipulations, amendment items, items that come to mind that you'd like to see? That way I can put that list and bucketize it, and that way next month's agenda would be around those buckets. Again, it might be what these questions really are about how are we gonna make sure that there's transparency and accountability. What these items are, how are we gonna make sure that third floor access or access for everybody is given. That might pop, making sure that there's equal opportunity access across the campus and in the entirety of the building. There's a lot of buckets that could naturally fall out, and that way it'll kind of inform the conversation. So next meeting would be a business plan presentation, a discussion about phasing, and then we would start to dive into what are the details that we need to have in order to try to make sure we move this project either forward or create more asks for the team to do, and they would come back to us, and we'll take it meeting by meeting at that point. We have at least the next meeting for this. I think after that, Stephanie calendarized, we have to start making sure we're recommending and approving the other projects as well. So,
January, February. Yeah.
right, so in January's meeting, if we focused on the hall again, I think we're still not gonna have enough time. We can, at that point, decide whether or not we need to push it to start focusing on fall, if we feel like more work needs to be done. And I know the longer, go ahead.
More work needs to be done, why don't we just have more meetings instead of one a month? I mean, you know, this is the biggest thing we've done since the shovel shop.
Yeah.
We met more than once a month during those.
Yep, so I'm happy to entertain that if people feel that they have the flexibility to do it. But at the same point, what I wanna make sure people don't feel is that this has to be done for that May meeting. I think it has to be done when the cake is finished cooking in the kitchen. And that's the right time. And if it happens for May, that's great. But if we find that we're not making the progress necessary and we continue to have a lot of questions, then I would just argue we don't rush it. We try to get it to be at the right place. So January, Tim, question?
I don't think I'd spend so much time on the phasing part, because it's a domino effect. When you start to do this, it triggers that street. These are all, you're gonna run into, all of a sudden you've invested enough ADA compliance is gonna be mandatory.
Yep.
It's, all these things are gonna trigger, so I don't think phasing is really gonna happen. Because when you start messing with AC, you're into electricity.
Yep.
Start messing with the elevator, you're into electricity. All these things are gonna start crossing, and it's just really,
I think that's fair. I think my advice and recommendation back to you would be, do the exercise.
yeah. Oh, no,
Because then that way you can tell someone that you did the exercise, and then you can better illustrate the interdependencies of the systems that you just referenced.
Yeah.
Because not only are we asking for our benefit, but we're asking because we know we're gonna stand in front of that town meeting and we're gonna wanna know those answers, right? Why didn't you consider phasing? Well, we did, and because of you folks doing the preparation, we'll be ready to articulate them. Because candidly, the top 3 items all cost 2 to 4 million, they were all critical. So 75% of your spend was these 3 items, focus on that. And then these smaller items, it would be foolish not to do it. And I wouldn't use the word foolish, but
Right.
it makes logical. So I guess help us just make sure we've explored that avenue. And then also from our perspective, we have to debate those downstream projects. And I'm gonna ask this committee to pick the ones they're not gonna do, if I have to. Because it's easy to say, oh, I know I can't do those things. It's hard when you pick the child. And I wanna make sure the committee takes that gravity to know we will not be able to do some things on our prioritized plan if we do this project. And I'd rather have that painful discussion now than kick that can down the road. And that way it brings it all to a head, just in case anybody would have changed their mind now. So I think you're spot on. That's a fair point. I think I can understand that. But the exercise would be invaluable.
Another thing that may be worth looking at too is your mobilization costs. How much will it cost if you go in phases to get the second or third level of management and that? It's gonna be greater than I think what you show here. They're mobilized, they're all set up. If you do it in 3 blocks, I don't know how much it's gonna be more than, the unit here, but it's gonna be a lot more. So just, if that might be useful too in your argument.
And the other aspect I think is it's hard if it's 15 or nothing. That can be hard sometimes. Doesn't mean it's always good to have reasons to do that. But if there are anything in there that you felt was not mission critical to the business plan that you're putting forth, then that would just be known too. The answer to that might be nope, we need it all, and that's okay. But for us, again, we're gonna have that discussion that says, if we do this, you can't do these things. And I just wanna try to understand that at that point. So it probably, I think the next meeting would be roughly January.
I have it right here. It is January 12th.
Got it. So what I'll probably do, Ed, is I'll take the January 12th meeting, leave it as it is, in between now and then our
Makes
holidays.
perfect sense, yeah.
And then on January 12th, if when you folks send me your items for consideration, you could send me what you think the frequency that you could commit to meeting would be. And as long as I feel like we can get the general group together for quorum, we can accelerate it up to, I guess, I think weekly is probably a lot, but anybody can put that down, but bi-weekly might be an opportunity to continue the dialogue. We'll have to throttle our expectations for how much a team can come back to us, the applicant can come back to us in 2 weeks. But that doesn't mean we can't get together and continue to ask more questions. and debate that.
I think it's a good idea
Yeah.
to do it twice a month.
Sure.
Are we thinking in person or virtual?
I think we could probably shift to a virtual format to make it easier for people in terms of our debate. I think it's important to hold these public sessions in case that there are abutters or that there are people from the town that want to come regarding this project, and I think interspersing them is helpful. But I think Zoom for the bi-weekly, without question, would be best, while we just hammer out what are the components that are critically important to us as a team. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Because I go both ways, like Zoom, some people can join from work, so it makes the residents be able to join, but then face-to-face, people get to ask questions and engage in this debate as well, so there's pros and cons on both. I think that's all I have currently. So next meeting is business plan presentation from OAMH, and we start our dialogue regarding grant agreement amendment and the stipulations, considerations, items like that.
Just a thought, with the holidays coming up, are you guys gonna be able to put this together?
I'm not sure of that.
I mean, that's pretty, yeah, I mean, in all fairness, I mean, who's gonna have time now we got crunch time now with the holidays?
Yeah, the holidays.
Two things. One, fairness. This has been a discussion for months.
Yeah.
Does it make it right or wrong?
Yeah, good point.
Two, I'll let you manage our expectations. We're willing to work hard and accelerate our number of meetings, but there has to be content for us to engage on. So why don't you, Fred and Suzanne, shoot me a message with when you think you'll have a business plan presentation, and we'll try to understand how that fits into our calendar of events.
All right.
Anything else, team? Long meeting, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Again, thanks to the town. Wayne, Stephanie, honestly, thank you for your continued efforts to keep us on track and everything you do behind the scenes that isn't seen. Team, thanks for coming out tonight. Meredith, I know your kids are probably still walking home, so if I see them, I will absolutely stop to pick them up. Which I think they're supposed to say no to, for the record. So if they say yes, we'll have a different teaching and learning moment. But thank you all so much. This is not an easy topic. Oaks Ames Memorial Hall team, thank you. It's a long night, and I appreciate that it's not just about tonight, but that you folks have a passion, and you're there many days and many nights that we don't get to see. So thank you for all you do to keep that asset for our community. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Excellent. That's Mr. Hands and Sheedy. Go around the table, Mr. Benson.
Benson, aye.
Tresco, aye?
Keach,
Sheedy, aye.
Broussard, aye.
Lee, aye.
Hands aye.
Unanimous vote to adjourn. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Oh, no problem.